Welcome to the fourth installment of the Director Dossiers podcast, where each episode chronologically details the production of and analyzes every movie in a director's filmography. If you'd like to see more of these retrospectives, let us know some of your favorite directors that we can do an episode on. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy.
Christopher Nolan was born July 30th, 1970 in Westminster, London, UK, to Brendan and Christina Nolan.
So he lived in America and England. So he was a dual citizen growing up. And the interesting thing is he was told when he turns 18, he's going to have to choose between being an American citizen and a citizen of the United Kingdom. And then luckily the rules changed before he turned 18, so he's a dual citizen now. But his brother, Jonathan, has just a complete American accent.
Yeah.
And then he's just like super British and austere. And then his brother's like, yeah, I'm from Boston.
Yeah.
He's not from Boston. He's from Chicago, but still.
Chicago, yeah. He said his brother said that people didn't vibe with him, or like they just didn't like him because he had a British accent.
Oh, really?
So he changed his accent basically.
Wait, Christopher Nolan changed his accent?
No,
Jonathan Nolan.
Yeah, his brother. When Nolan was 8, his father gifted him a Super 8 camera, and he immediately started making his own films.
So when Nolan was 7, of course, because he was born in 70 and Star Wars came out in 77, his dad took him to see Star Wars. And he saw it in America 6 months before anybody in England got to see it. Because back then they were using the same prints. So it would have to be done in America playing. And then they would ship all the prints over to the UK. So he came back from the summer being like, holy shit, I saw this thing. You got to believe it. They're like, shut up.
Yeah,
You don't know what you're talking about. And then 6 months later, they were like, why didn't you say anything? This is the best movie. But that's important because one of the first things he did with the Super 8 camera was make a little short film called Space Wars. And there was these two Ukrainian kids, I forget their name, they had Ukrainian names, that he was friends with growing up. And the guys later said, believe it or not, a lot of the shots we did in Space Wars when we were kids ended up in Interstellar.
Nice.
The way the camera would be stuck to the side of the spaceship, because he was working with miniatures now, so he was doing visual effects on his own when he was super young, and obviously doing that at that age, you're going to have much of a head start.
Yeah, he also talks about at that age seeing like 2001.
Oh, yeah.
And it's an interview, and the lady goes, "So did you like understand what was going on?" He's like, "I think I understood it better back then because
Yeah.
his brain didn't think too hard into it."
He said the reason why 2001 might work better for children is because they're much more open to having an experiential event rather than what's the story,
Yeah,
who's
what's
the
the
main
meaning?
character.
Nolan attended the Haileybury and Imperial Service College, a boarding school where his interest in filmmaking was put to pause.
So there's a book, The Nolan Variations, by Tom Shum, which is right behind me, where he talks about his time at boarding school, and they talk about how it's the worst thing ever, and then Nolan's like, I actually kind of liked it. There was one thing, he did see movies, like I guess in the summer, there was one story he talked about where when everybody was going to bed at night, he would, on his Walkman, I think it was, he would listen to the scores for movies like Chariots of Fire.
Dude, we're gonna get copyright strike.
Oh no! Shit.
It's too accurate. After taking a year off traveling and making his short film Tarantella, Nolan enrolled at University College London to study English.
So his professor told him, if you're going to be obsessed with movies, you have to be just as obsessed with books. And he goes, yeah, I'm not. There's no way I can do that. And he goes, well, you're going to have to fake it. So then Nolan started reading books. I don't know,
It's probably good advice, though, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess reading is a good. There's a video of Werner Herzog, and it's a video called "Directors Giving Their Advice" or whatever. And his part, everybody's like, "You have to do this, you have to do this," and then his part, they go, "What does the filmmaker need to do?" He just goes, "Read, read, read," and he goes on for like 20 seconds, and all the comments are like, some say he's still saying it to this day. So I get, reading. I don't want to. I mean, reading's important because I read like 10 books a day.
Dude.
Ty Lopez, I read a book a day.
Nice.
But his time at UCL, he was the president of the Film Society there. So he was basically in charge of raising money so that all the students there can make short films. And he made acquaintances, his future wife, Emma Thomas, and then Jeremy Theobald, who was an actor that was in his first short film, Doodlebug, and also his first movie, Following, and also has cameos in Batman Begins and Tenet. And Alex Haw, I believe, who's Cobb from Following, who's really good. And then this other guy, David Julian, who is a musician. The musicians, they're not really that important to the projects.
No,
I'm only saying that because Danny's a musician. And he made friends with them, and they were making short films and stuff. And then subsequently, after they graduated, he enlisted their help to make other short films.
Mm-hmm. After UCL, he was rejected by the National Film and Television School in England and Royal College of Art.
Yeah, I'm sure they're backtracking, rejecting him. They're probably going to, well, look, listen, hear us out. The reason we rejected him because we knew that he would just be wasting his time going to our schools. We knew that he was great. So that's interesting. That's like, I guess, an inspirational thing where, well, I guess it's a true version of when people say Einstein failed math.
Yeah,
it's like, this is not true,
no,
but it's true that he was rejected, which is kind of crazy. So after he got rejected, he just decided to, screw it, I'm just going to make stuff on my own. And I think, what was the company? I think it was Airwaves Media or something like that, where he got a job as a cameraman. And he had to do all these corporate videos and things like that, which got him some good experience.
Tarantella, Larceny, and Doodlebug. Nolan's first credit on IMDb is a short film he made when he was 19 titled Tarantella.
I saw this. It was posted. It was actually found very recently, like sometime in the last 2 years. And it's basically this weird, artsy horror David Lynch type thing that just makes you very antsy and existentially anxious about everything. You're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's interesting if you want to see. You'll probably not understand it because it's more of just a weird, creative, experimental thing, you know. But it's interesting to see.
He was just in his artsy phase. I mean, I guess he never.
He was in.
left it,
Yeah,
but-
he was in. That was his. He was in his British goth phase, emo phase. Everywhere I go, I see Tarantellas.
Nolan's first attempt at a feature, Larry Mahoney, was scrapped in the mid-1990s.
Yeah, I couldn't find much information. It sounds like a comedy because Larry Mahoney is like he sounds as if he was a mobster in the 1930s. Like, hey, I'm Larry Mahoney. You stay out of my hood. You know,
I'm Larry Mahoney. I'm walking
Yeah,
here.
exactly. So I couldn't find much information, but I know he was it because they filmed a lot of it, and I think he put a screening together for the people that were in it, and then afterwards he was just like, I don't think this is gonna work. So
Around this time, Nolan also made a short titled Doodlebug, in which a man in a dingy apartment tries to kill a bug with his shoe.
correction, dingy apartment. Dingy is the boat from GTA.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. My brain's always in GTA land. We made like 7 GTA references
we made
last
so many.
podcast.
Oh, we're still. We're still in. We're still in the podcast. All right, let's keep going. Let's keep going. Okay, so yeah, Doodlebug. Doodlebug is very good. Should we try to salvage it? Screw it. Everybody's. I'm sorry if you're watching, but we have to keep going. So, Doodlebug is a very good short film because you watch it and you go, that makes 100% sense how Christopher Nolan would direct that. Because what the premise is it's about this guy and he's in this shitty, crummy apartment. He's all sweaty, like he hasn't showered in days. He's wearing a wife beater, and he has a shoe, and he's just running around his apartment trying to get a bug. And he's going, I gotcha. It's Jeremy Theobald from Following. And he keeps smacking the thing and he can't get it. And then finally he reveals it, and it's revealed just to be a tiny version of him. And then he raises the big guy raises his shoe, and as he does, we see a larger version of himself behind him. And then he smacks himself, and then it's over. And that's very Christopher Nolan. That set the tone for his entire filmography.
Yeah,
That kind
definitely.
of that looping kind of narrative.
One night, Nolan and Emma Thomas's apartment was broken into. This incited Nolan to make a short film called Larceny, which follows a pickpocketer being chased by the people he stole from.
So I tried really hard. I couldn't find a print of it anywhere, and I think the story is he semi-completed it and showed it to all the people who were in it, but at that time he was already too invested in Following as a feature-length idea, so he just abandoned it and said, screw this, I'm out of here. And I think the only way you can see it, it's only been shown in private screenings. I think there's a print of it in somewhere in England. It might be at UCL, the College of London that he went to, or it might be somewhere else in some kind of film theater registry thing. But yeah, nobody can see it. It's not on the internet, as far as I know. And if it is, send me the link and then give me the credit.
Yeah, comment us in the link.
And then
we'll
say I sent it to you.
Still grappling with his apartment being broken into, Nolan chose to explore this idea further in the script for what would be his first feature film, Following.
So there were sort of a few multiple converging ideas and subject matters where he came at Following through. and it was obviously his apartment getting broken into, but it was also him living in England and being so close to people and realizing, oh, if you're walking on the street, you're never walking at the same pace as anybody else. If you walk near somebody, you always walk faster or slower, so you don't have to be near them.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of a guy who lives in a city with all these people but being extremely isolated and alone was kind of fascinating to him, and he kind of merged that with the idea of the burglary stuff.
Funded with Nolan's bonuses from working as a camera operator, Following was filmed on weekends over the course of a year.
So the commentary for this, there's a commentary that that Nolan did when this got a DVD release. That's very interesting. It was very informative to somebody looking to make a micro-budget feature, which you and I have done for $2,500. And one of the excellent things that he talked about was, obviously we're making a micro-budget feature for $6,000. And obviously today, like, we made it for $2,500. He probably spent the same amount of money to making the movie. The rest was just the film stock, because the film stock was usually the bulk of micro-budget features. Robert Rodriguez's micro feature, El Mariachi, he filmed that for $7,000. Most of that was on the film stock.
Yeah.
But we filmed it digitally, so we saved some moolah. But one of the great ideas he talked about was, obviously it's a micro feature and people are going to be looking for flaws, I guess. We have to make this seem more legit than it actually is. So what he did is, in the opening shots, when he's talking to when Bill's talking to the detective, he's like, "This is my story. This is the bloody following night." They rented out a dolly for that scene, so that they were making these nice smooth camera moves and kind of upping the production value of the movie a little bit. And what it does is it gives the illusion to the audience that the rest of the handheld stuff in the rest of the movie is a creative choice rather than a necessity, which it wasn't a creative choice. They had to shoot it handheld. They didn't have the time or money to do that. But it made it look like it was a choice. And we do a similar thing in our movie where we have a lot of people in the beginning of the scene. In the first scene, we have a lot of people and all these locations in the first 10 minutes, and then the rest of the movie is contained to kind of one area. So it's very, 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 very helpful.
Nice little psychological tricks.
Yes,
Play.
exactly. And they for lighting, they only had a few lights, so they would always just shoot by windows. He spent 6 months before the movie. They spent 6 months before filming just rehearsing the scenes so that they knew everything.
Mm-hmm.
And they knew all the lines, so they could just run in and run and gun and get that shit and get out of there.
Mm-hmm. It's probably why it's in black and white now that I'm thinking about it too. Cheaper, right?
Well, yes. So it was partly the reason. He talked about how, if it's in black and white, the lighting doesn't have to be perfect. You can be a little sloppier with the lighting and get away with it. And also, it's cheaper, which is Kevin Smith, I think, for Clerks.
Yeah, that's
the same.
what I was thinking about.
It's the same thing too. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kevin Smith talks about how they did the first one in black and white, and people were all like, "Oh, it looks like you're watching it from the." And he's just like, "Yeah, that's why."
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, it wasn't because it was cheaper at all. It was just a creative genius.
So, yeah, exactly. The main cast and crew consisted of Jeremy Theobald, Alex Hall, Lucy Russell, and David Julian.
Do you know what Alex Hall's middle name is?
Big Hall.
Yeehaw. It's not Yeehaw. I just made that up. So the reason that's in there is because those are the same people from that he met from UCL, and also Emma Thomas produced the movie with Nolan. And Alex Hall, after they filmed the movie, went off to Australia, and Nolan never saw him again. Jeremy.
He's just like, fuck that. Christopher Nolan.
He's the best guy. He's like the best actor in the movie. He's great. And then Jeremy Theobald had a cameo in Batman Begins as the guy in the control room with the water, where he's like, Jesus, it's spiking right there. And then the guy's like, if we don't get that water down, this whole city's going to blow. And then he was also in Tenet. He was the steward guy. He was the waiter guy in that restaurant in Michael Caine's scene, where he's like, can you box this up for me? And he was like, no. So he was that guy. And then Lucy Russell was the lady in Batman Begins who was like, but he's put Falcone behind bars. That lady. David Julian was the composer on Following, and then he did the music on Memento, which I think is great. He did the music on Insomnia, which is good, and then he did the music on The Prestige. But he did not do Batman Begins.
Following was accepted into the 1998 San Francisco Film Festival and went on to receive accolades at Toronto and Slamdance. It was picked up for the distribution by Zeitgeist Films, grossing $48,000 in the limited release.
So I think we've both seen Following. I've seen it a few times now. Mm-hmm. And so going into it, the first few minutes you're like, is this maybe, I don't know about this. Because the uphill battle that a micro-budget movie has is you're trying to make the audience forget that the budget is so little and just trying to get them invested in the story. And right off the bat, I think I don't want to say that they're mistakes, but there are some signs of a student film type vibe from the movie. Because I think in the first shot of Bill we see in the movie, he's in front of he's in Dunkin' Donuts, and the Dunkin' Donuts logo is right in front of him. And then later in his apartment, we see The Shining. We see Jack Torrance from The Shining in the bathroom door. And then later on Bill's apartment, we see a Batman sticker. And you see, if you're watching a short film and you see a Pulp Fiction poster in the background, it takes you out of the illusion of the short film. And go, oh, they filmed this at one of the kids' houses.
Yeah.
Like they filmed this at the director's house, let's say. So I don't think it was intentional. I just think it was by happenstance or whatever. But to be fair, the Batman thing is pretty funny, and is probably like the most ultimate form of foreshadowing in a movie
definitely.
ever. But I think right after those first 10 minutes, you're just so invested in it because what it does, it's doing a noir story. And it's the thing that's impressive about it is if you're usually making a micro budget film, you're trying to emulate or reach a certain level of movie. So you're trying to do a noir story, right? But here he was already sort of toying with a noir and playing with the genre a little bit because he had this nonlinear structure. And for somebody so young to successfully do a nonlinear structure is impressive. And I think that's what gets audiences involved in the story so quickly. Because after the first 10 minutes, I forget that it's a micro budget feature. I'm just so invested in it because now it's the tables have turned. You're not the audience going, fine, impress me. You're the audience going, shit, I have to keep up.
Yeah, exactly.
He immediately turns the tables on you.
That's how I felt the whole time. I was just the main character is so, I guess, like when you see him, just the way he acts in the first few minutes of the film makes him seem so strange that I'm thinking in my mind, like, what is going on with this guy?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's just how I felt pretty much the whole time.
The first time you see him, he's got this shitty hair that he hasn't. It looks like he hasn't washed it in weeks, and he just looks like an overall grimy guy.
Yeah, and he is an overall grimy guy.
Yeah.
So,
we're speaking about the budget before, and I think this movie is a great example of how I think starkly realized Nolan's style and feel as a director is, because at $600, this feels just as much like a Christopher Nolan movie as his movies at $200 million. Particularly, I think the biggest marker, or the most noticeable and obvious marker of a Christopher Nolan movie that one can see pretty easily, is the way he just flashes back to things.
yeah.
So when Lucy Russell, the blonde, she's talking about her backstory where, he killed a guy in my apartment, and then it cuts back, and then she goes, and then he has nude photos of me, and it cuts back, keeps coming back to these flashbacks, and that feels very reminiscent and very almost exactly similar to Elizabeth Debicki's character describing how in Tenet, Kenneth Branagh's character Sador has his hold over her. It feels the same. It feels exactly the same, and look at any there's a flashback like that in every one of Nolan's movies, and just look back at those and be like, oh yeah, this is all like the same feel. Just showing a quick, because he talks about how people often will use when they fade into a flashback, they usually do a wavy dissolve, and it's like sometimes memory's not like that. Sometimes memory just pops up for like a second. One of the things I really like about that flashback, and it shows Nolan's, I guess, sort of maturity as a screenwriter, is. And this is something similar we talked about on the Paul Thomas Anderson podcast, where he already had a knack for going the extra mile with these background characters that are periphery characters. There's the guy when he kills when the blonde is talking about how her ex-lover boss guy killed that guy with the hammer in her apartment. The guy gets up, and we could have just cut. We get it. We get the gist of the scene, but Nolan just shows the guy see the blood on his hands. He goes, someone get me a tea towel or something. Yeah. Which is like a perfect little line. So now you know everything about that character. You know that he's killed somebody before. He doesn't give a shit that he just killed this guy.
No fucks at all.
And he just the biggest inconvenience about him killing this guy is that his hands are sticky now from the blood or whatever. And that poses a bigger danger to the blonde's character.
Definitely.
How much of that was that story real? Because she's working for Cobb, sort of. They're kind of doing their own thing going on. Is that story just a ploy to Bill to try to get him to fall for whatever she's trying to do?
It could have been. I mean, I don't think it matters whether it is or isn't. You
Yeah,
know?
that's a good point.
Because I mean, if it is, she can still use that as a reason to trick him into thinking she really needs help.
Yeah.
And if it isn't, it's just a really good made up story that they came up with, a very believable story. Memento, 2000. The genesis of Memento came when Nolan was on a road trip with his brother Jonathan, who told him his idea for a new short story he was writing.
His brother Jonathan, who secretly has a British accent, mind you. That son of a
Hiding it.
bitch. No, he's good. So I don't know if they were on a road trip, but they were in the car at like a gas station or some shit. And Nolan was obviously writing the short story called Memento Mori about this guy who had short-term memory. And it wasn't short-term memory. It was anterograde. So he remembers everything up until when he got hit in the head, and then he can't make new memories after that. And Nolan said that he told him this verbally in the car and was like, "Holy shit, can I go make a movie about this?" He was like, "Yeah, go for it, sure." And so Nolan subsequently went away, and he said, "I spent months and months and months banging my head against the wall, trying to figure out how to make the audience experience the amnesia with Leonard." And what he ultimately came up with, and the structure we all know, is basically telling the story backwards.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a crazy, like, we'll get to my exact thoughts on that, but I think that might be like one of the best creative decisions in anything of all time.
Mm-hmm. And I told you, this is just a funny story. I watched this and I was like falling asleep the first time I watched through it, and I would fall asleep and wake up and it'd be like the same scene. I was like, what is going on? Just so confused.
You're like, when I sleep, do I go back in time?
Yeah. I felt like the character. I
Yeah.
was like just waking up and being like, strange room.
You know Guy Pearce used to be a bodybuilder?
Before the film?
Yeah.
Wow.
I didn't know that.
That's
Because I did
crazy.
realize, like, oh, he like looks like he works out, but then I didn't realize he was an actor. He was 220 pounds
Dang.
at one point, which is insane. I didn't know that.
Eventually, the script was picked up by Newcastle Entertainment and greenlit with a budget of $4.5 million.
$4.5 million is important to point out because some people say 10 million, and IMDb says 9 million. I don't know where those numbers are from. Nolan said himself that the budget for Insomnia is 10 times bigger than the budget for Memento, and the budget for Insomnia was $46 million, which would make the budget for this $4.6 million. And he talks about how they had to film it. They had to film it on such a breakneck pace. They filmed it inside of a month. It was September 7th to October 1st. They filmed it in less than a month. And they talked about how we just had to run and get these shots. We couldn't. It was crazy.
I feel like you get that sense in some of the scenes. They're super quick.
Yeah, the
moving,
movie. Yeah, the
some of
movie
them.
kind of has a kind of that pace, that energy to it.
Has like a one take pace to it.
Right,
Maybe,
yeah.
you know, like it seems like they just did it and they were like, all right, let's go,
Yeah.
let's go.
But it's
Not saying that the quality goes down. It just feel like you feel
right.
that in the
You feel the
pacing.
urgency.
After it was completed, Memento had a successful film festival run. However, Newmarket Films still couldn't find a distributor for the movie.
Yeah, so they went around to all these film festivals. I think maybe Venice and Sundance it was a big hit at. And everybody would say, "Oh, this is a great movie. Oh, congratulations, great movie." And then he'd be like, "Nice, dude. You want to buy it?" And they're like, "Hell no. What are you talking about?" Because I don't know if the distributors were like, "I don't know how to market this or anything." Because how do you explain that the movie's going to be told backwards? Maybe they were just afraid of that, but they couldn't find a distributor. The movie was done in, I believe, in 99 maybe. It was done in 99, I believe. When was it filmed? So it was filmed October 99. So it was done by 99. And then for a year, they couldn't find distribution. And then it was finally released in the U.S. March 16th, 2001. But it's technically from the year 2000 because it went to the film. They went on the film festival circuit before its release. And but then so they couldn't find distribution. And then Newmarket, who was just a production company, was like, "Screw it, we'll distribute it ourselves." And then it ended up making, of a $4.5 million budget, it made like $39 million worldwide. And at one point, I think it was maybe Harvey Weinstein tried to come in and be like, "No, let me get it." And they were like, "Fuck off. What?" So they're like, "Hey, screw you, pal. We know what happens 20 years from now."
Yeah. Memento was released on March 16th, 2001 to critical acclaim and ultimately grossed $39 million worldwide. It was nominated for Best Original Screenplay and Best Film Editing at the Oscars.
So the best original screenplay, Jonathan Nolan, he was credited on the screenplay, but it got nominated for Best Original Screenplay, not adapted. even though Nolan adapted it from Jonathan Nolan's story. But it got Best Original because Jonathan Nolan's story wasn't published until after the movie came out, which is interesting. And I said this movie, I think conceptually, is one of the greatest premises of all time. And I think the idea to have the story told backwards is also a great idea. Because when Nolan said, "How do I get people to experience amnesia?" Leonard always talks about how he goes, I like to look people in the eye when I talk to them, because what he's doing is trying to read them and see if they're lying to him, because he worked as an insurance agent and that was basically his job, or to figure out if people were faking whatever injuries for insurance purposes. And that premise makes us do the exact same thing when we meet somebody, because when Teddy goes, "Lenny," we're like, we know that they have a history, but just like Leonard, we know that they have a history, but we don't know what it is. So we're looking for all these cues, like, is he lying? What's going on here?
Yeah. You get that. I feel like this movie the whole time, just one of the goals is to make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Like, for me, it just made me feel a little uncomfortable, because just thinking about what it must be like to be in that guy's shoes, just not remembering anything, and then immediately meeting someone who is trying to poke at you in one way or another, like either trying to help you or not trying to help you, and having to be given that decision every single time you wake up is just super stressful.
It sort of reminds me of if you have a bunch of money and you're like, what does this guy's play at? Like,
yeah.
Because him having a guy with no memory, I doubt there's nobody in the movie who just wants to be friends with him, because why am I going to be friends with somebody who is going to forget me tomorrow? So the only reason they're spending time with him is because they can get something from him. And that's true with every character. Even the hotel clerk guy, Mark Boone Jr. from Sons of Anarchy, has been charging him extra rooms, to just, ripping him off. And then obviously Natalie has her own thing where she wants him to kill Teddy for her, because Teddy made Leonard kill Jimmy.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. if you catch my drift, we'll get to it. And then obviously Teddy is trying to just make a buck off of Leonard by Leonard killing Jimmy. He was like, "Oh, I'm gonna make $100,000. You get half of it too," or whatever, But that premise really puts you inside Leonard's head. I think more so than maybe any other character. It gives you an incredibly internal experience to Leonard's character. And the thing it does at the end that I didn't really notice before, when I watched, because I've seen this movie like 5 times now. The first couple times I watched, I didn't really see this, but now I see how Leonard talks about in the movie how memory can be, it can change the shape of a room, it can change the color of a car, but we don't really question any of Leonard's memories from before the incident until later in the movie. The whole movie we just take them as a given, like, oh yeah, his wife's dead, blah blah blah. But so they have there's a great video of Nolan explaining the structure of the movie, and on YouTube, and he talks about how the black and white scenes go forward, and the color scenes go backward. The black and white takes place essentially at the first half of the story chronologically, and then the color scenes take place on the second half chronologically. And at the end, the black and white scenes and the color scenes, because they're going towards each other, they end up meeting and mixing together. And he talked about how the black and white scenes are the objective experience, or a more objective experience, and the color scenes are a more subjective experience that is based off of Leonard's kind of squirrely memory and stuff like that. It's very linked to him. And he uses the same thing on Oppenheimer, where the black and white scenes in Oppenheimer are more over Robert Downey Jr. or Louis Strauss's shoulders, and Oppenheimer's kind of farther away in the frame, and then the color scenes in that are all Oppenheimer, minus, but in Oppenheimer, of course, neither of those timelines go backwards or anything. But what happens is he kills Jimmy in the black and white scene, and then when he takes the picture of Jimmy, as the photo develops, the frame increases in saturation, and now we're back in color, right? But the problem is an objective and subjective perspectives can't really exist. They have to. It's binary. They can't be one or the other. So all this thing with Leonard's memories is sort of getting all scrambled up and mixed together. And in the first few times I watched the movie, I didn't notice the transition from black and white to color in that scene. I didn't realize that was happening.
Yeah.
Just the same way that Leonard wouldn't realize if his memories are faulty or anything like that. And then in that scene, suddenly all of Leonard's memories are called into question. Where Teddy goes, "Hey, geez, Leonard, your wife, you already killed the guy. Your wife didn't. She survived the accident. You killed her with the insulin injections,
Mm-hmm.
and you killed the guy a year ago. Look how happy you were. Blah blah blah." And the movie's consciousness at that point almost reaches this fever dream state where you don't know what's going on or whatever, and I don't know who to believe. Like, I used to think, oh, so the big reveal is that that story didn't happen with Sammy Jankis. It was Leonard who killed his wife. But I don't understand, because the Christopher Nolan talked about how, am I making sense? Okay.
Yeah.
So Christopher Nolan talked about how, they set up in the movie there's many ways one could absorb information outside of memory. Leonard does it through habit and routine, right? But it doesn't set up a way how he would remember if Teddy is telling the truth in that his wife survived the accident and he was the reason why his wife had him, repeatedly inject herself with insulin and die. How would he know that information? And how would he know it? How would he remember it enough to falsely associate it with Sammy Jankis' character? Because Teddy goes, Sammy Jankis was a con man, a faker. Your wife survived and you killed her, blah, blah, blah. So I don't understand how that would be real. And the other reason is that Teddy's been lying to Leonard the whole time. So why would we take his word on this at all? And we can believe that him when he says, "Oh, you already killed the guy who killed your wife," because he has the picture of Leonard doing this. And he says, he goes, you didn't remember. So if he didn't remember killing the guy who killed his wife, how would he remember killing his wife at all? Accidentally. But the other reason I don't believe Teddy is because I think it's pretty obvious that he's the guy on the phone that's been talking to Leonard the whole time. I don't know, something bad maybe. Because Leonard is, the only reason Leonard knows that the killer is a drug dealer is because the person on the phone told him that he deals drugs, or kind of pushed him in that direction over the phone. So you can see the person on the phone kind of manipulating him into thinking that Jimmy, the drug dealer, is the killer, because Teddy wanted to kill Jimmy so that they can take the $200K from his trunk and split it, right? And then of course, now I'm just explaining the plot. But then when Natalie finds out that Leonard killed Jimmy, she goes, I'm not going to get revenge on this guy who can't remember anything. She actually feels sort of sympathetic to him when she first meets him. She goes, oh, let me get you another, because they spit in the cup, which is the most gross thing ever in that one scene. And then he drinks the spit, and she's like, oh shit, he's for real. She goes, let me get you another one. She goes, all right, I'm going to use him to kill Teddy.
The cool thing about this whole scenario is that we're not really keen on how long he's been getting taken advantage of by these people. So, she walks in, the scene where she walks in and gets him to punch her, and then she walks out into the car and walks back in perfectly timed with when his memory resets. So she knows this, exactly when his memory resets.
Right.
She's perfectly in time with how to take advantage of him in this way. So she must have been doing it for super long to know that.
It's weird. Because some scenes, I think that's made, if that could be can be considered a flaw in the movie, because there is sometimes where it seems he's remembering stuff for kind of a long time, maybe it's 10 minutes, but in other scenes it's he loses it in 5 seconds, because in that scene it takes about a minute for him to forget. But the whole thing with when he kills Jimmy, has that whole conversation with Teddy, and then goes out into the car and then writes Teddy's license plate number down, that's a 10-minute thing. So how is he remembering all? I think the movie might be a little convenient with what he remembers in for the sake of dramaticism. You know what I mean? Yeah, but I talked about how in Following that kind of had a modern spin on the noir genre, and I think this movie does the same thing, because I talked about Lucy Russell's character being the deceptive blonde, and the deceptive blonde is the deceptive brunette, which is Natalie, right? And the memory loss thing. The amnesia premise of this movie is a very common idea in noirs, where the character wakes up and he doesn't know who he is or what's going on. That's a very cartoonish look at amnesia. But the way that this movie changes the premise of having an amnesic noir protagonist by having him be an anterograde amnesic protagonist, where he remembers everything. What?
Just anterograde?
That's what it's called.
Okay.
And and so he remembers everything before the incident. He just can't make new memories. The way Nolan even innovates that part of the noir genre is a microcosm for how Memento as a whole innovated the noir genre.
Mm-hmm. And there's other things in this movie where he talks about. I mean, even the first scene where it moves in reverse. He said that was like the spark of Tenet, basically, because it
Right.
started making him think more about reverse time.
Right, about like actually just having legit, literal reverse imagery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Insomnia, 2002. Impressed by Memento, director/producer Steven Soderbergh recommended that Warner Brothers hire Nolan to direct the English-language remake of the Norwegian thriller Insomnia.
So Nolan talks about how this is sort of a very personal movie for him in memory, because it was basically his tryout to be a studio director.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first time he was working, with a big studio on location with big stars. He was working with Al Pacino and Robin Williams.
Sweet.
Hilary Swank didn't do $1 Million Baby yet, but I guess she did it. She was a Boys Don't Cry, so I think she was an Oscar winner. I think she won an Oscar for that. Did she? Maybe she was nominated. I don't know. But yeah, so that was a big deal for him. There's not a lot about the production. Obviously they shot in Alaska, and I think while they were filming, there was no nighttime.
Yeah.
I think that's, which is interesting, because
Would
they can
make
just
sense.
film all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't have to worry about losing the light.
Yeah. That must have been, if that actually is true, I'd be scared to be in that crew. Because, I mean, actually, I don't know. We haven't really talked about that. How is Christopher Nolan on set? Is he super,
He wears a suit every time.
Nice. Baller.
And I don't know, there's not a lot of story, because James Cameron's a director where there's a lot of juicy stories about him being like, get the fuck off my set, like that kind of shit.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not a lot of stuff like that. There's not a lot of pulpy, sort of juicy stories about Nolan in that way.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of sensationalist kind of stories about him.
I'm thinking now, I mean, he makes people sign NDAs, so they can't
Yeah,
really
he's very
talk
secretive.
anything. They can't even tell their own family where they are.
Yeah.
Like Justin.
Oh yeah,
Can you talk
we'll
about
explain
Justin?
that. Yeah.
Do you want me to explain it right now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So my neighbor Justin Zafiro, maybe he'll watch this, but he is a cameraman for Christopher Nolan. What do you know his actual role in, like on Tenet and stuff like that?
Well, I think he was just a cameraman, either A camera or B camera or whatever.
Okay, but either way, he was on set for Tenet, and he wasn't even allowed to tell anyone where he was, basically, which is scary. But they know he's working with Christopher Nolan, so
Yeah. It's funny that
awesome.
imagine not being able to I'm going somewhere super super secret. Like, where is it? Australia. Like what? Like, why can't you tell anybody you're Australian? So there's not a lot of production story. There's not a lot of production stories involving Insomnia, but still.
Mm-hmm. On May 24th, 2002, Insomnia was released to positive reviews and a B cinema score from audiences, and it made $113 million worldwide off a $46 million budget.
So I think it's evident that Insomnia is probably his most conventional movie. I don't really think that would be, controversial to say. What would be another? I mean, maybe The Dark Knight Rises or Batman Begins.
Yeah, other
Even
than
Batman Begins for that time wasn't a very conventional movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think him working in because like I said before, this is him proving that he can be a studio director, and non-linear stories are great, but before Nolan, non-linear story isn't the best. It doesn't really scream box office. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So him doing this had to prove that, okay, I can do the nonlinear stuff, but I have to do a commercially appealing movie that is just a conventional narrative, which is harder than it's underratedly difficult to do that. People don't realize how hard it is to make a good movie that makes a lot of money, even if they might not be as artistically complicated as something like Memento, right? But I do think the thing that attracted him to this story is, I think the premise, just like I said, the premise of Memento is great. I think the premise of this movie is so fantastic because, again, it's a premise that puts you into internally into the character's head, where Will Dormer, he's the best detective. He's wearing shades. He's like, I'm cool. Everybody knows about his cases. And then he shows up and his partner goes, hey, I'm going to testify. I'm explaining the plot, but I'm doing it to make a point.
Mm-hmm.
I'm explaining the goddamn thing. I'm going to go tell them all about all the crimes we did or all the the sketchy stuff we did. And he goes, you can't. If you do that, it'll put all the guys I put behind bars, it'll get them free again. And he goes, well, I'm going to do it. And then they're in the woods. They corner the killer, and then he shoots his partner and makes a quick second decision and goes, shit, I'm just going to blame it on the killer. And then the whole movie, and instantly it becomes a whodunit to now this weird thriller, and it also becomes a how and why done it after we found, I think we found out like halfway through the movie that Robin Williams is the killer, Walter Finch, and I think we meet him around that. But then we spend, not only do we have to find the killer from that moment of the first act where he kills Hap, but now we have to, there's an extra layer of tension to Will Dormer having to cover his own tracks, and Hilary Swank's character, Ellie, being, so devoted and like being his biggest fan, and then has to investigate, how exactly Hap died. That's a very interesting narrative, part two. And I think even though it's conventional, I think it is subversive to that, that killer genre. And I think the dilemma, because the interesting thing that the interesting conflict that Will Dormer goes through is obviously he can't sleep because he feels an extreme amount of guilt, but also the dilemma he faces is actually pretty compelling, where he goes, I can put Walter Finch behind bars, but if I do, all the guys that I released will be released from prison because he'll tell everybody what I did to Hap, and then everybody will. But if I let him go, then everybody will be fine. But I have to let him go. Shit, because he genuinely does. He genuinely does care about putting criminals behind bars. Yeah. So I think that's a great dilemma, and it puts you right in his mind the entire movie.
Mm-hmm. And it's impressive how he, like you said, he had to prove that he could do a more box off appealing movie. But he still, instead of going the nonlinear way, he still finds a way to make you question reality.
Yes.
He finds a way to drive his characters to question reality, which makes the audience also question it.
Right, and he does it in such a subtle way, technically, where a director would, let's say you're trying to highlight Dormer's sleeplessness by showing his increasing sensitivity to light in that room, right? Mm-hmm. Another director would just have the guys outside go, all right, turn up the lights, and then make it get brighter and brighter. But what he does is he shoots a shot of the lights coming in through a crack in the curtains, and then he doesn't change the light. He just slowly turns the camera out of focus, and the fact that the light gets blurry, it looks like it's expanding on the screen, and it serves two purposes. It shows the lights increasing size in Will's psyche, but it also shows everything getting out of focus and suggesting a more dazed and disoriented state in his psyche. And then later, and this is something that I was pretty impressed by, as me and you worked for a company where we had to travel. We had to drive down to Florida. It was a live event production company. We had to drive down to Florida a few times through the night for like 48 hours. It sucked.
Terrible.
And we experienced like pretty much the same amount of sleeplessness and disorientation that Will goes through in the movie. There's a scene where he's driving near near the climax, where he's driving to Walter Finch's cabin, so that and Ellie's there. He's like, well, shit, I gotta go stop him from getting Ellie, and he's driving, and then Nolan dials the shutter speed, I think, on the camera, and then shows Will kind of hypnotically gazing at the windshield wipers on the screen, and then all of a sudden, just as he's about to fall asleep, we see a truck coming towards the car going, and he gets, and there's nobody on the road, and for some, I saw that described as like, oh, it's kind of not really, it's just depicting a disorientation rather than sleeplessness. I'm like, dude, that's pretty accurate. Because you know the story where we were driving up from Florida, and it was in the middle of the night, and we've been up for 72 hours, 48 hours, whatever it was, and he's driving in a box truck ahead of me, and I'm driving in a Sprinter van, and I was so tired while driving that in the box of the box truck in the square, I hallucinated a little girl drawing in her room. And I was like, oh, look at that little girl. She's drawing. Wait a minute. And then I called you. I'm like, dude, we got to pull over. I got to get some peanut M&Ms.
Dude, just 2 more hours. We can do it.
we had 7 more hours left. It sucked. It was awful.
Yeah, that's one of those things where that state of consciousness, like the sleeplessness, maybe not everyone knows about it, but for the people who do, I mean, that just focusing on the windshields going by and almost being hypnotized by it,
Right.
like I know that feeling.
Yeah.
You know, you get, and just his face, like his face when he's just. It's
Al
so,
Pacino
that
has the
dude,
best tired
his
face.
Tired face. It
It's
just
so funny.
imagine like if you're at a bar with someone and they're sitting there going.
Yeah, he's yeah. After they catch when Walter Finch frames the boyfriend. What's the boyfriend's name?
I can't remember.
Let's say it's Billy, whatever the
Yeah.
fuck. They frame him for killing Kay,
Yeah.
and they're all drinking at the bar. And Al Pacino, who's clearly had one beer, they're all at the bar going, "Hey, we did it! I got a broken leg." And then Al Pacino's just sitting there going, "They go, what do you think, Will? Are you happy?" Oh, like he's totally got. And they're all like, "Oh, you had too many, pal." Like, no, what?
You're drunk, and then the one guy's like, "You need some sleep," and it's like, dude,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what he needs. He's the whole time, almost like half of the movie, he's like,
Yeah, the whole time. I like the scene. Maura Tierney's character, the hotel lady worker. I like when he's putting all the shit up on the window, all the furniture, and like piling it up at the window. And she comes in. She goes, "What are you doing?" He's like, "It's so fucking bright in here." And then she goes, "No, it's not dark. It's not bright. It's dark." And that was good. But the performance that I really like for some reason is Hilary Swank's performance as Ellie. I have a weird soft spot for her character. I think she's great. I think that's a great character for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, it represents. I feel like it's meant to represent like just a pure version of what the main guy wants to be. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I see. Well, yeah, that's a good point because at the end, she goes because then she realizes what's going on, and he talks about how there was a guy who knew he was guilty, who he knew was guilty, and the jury didn't find him guilty, and they let him go. So he planted evidence in the guy's apartment that sent him to jail, and that was the thing that Hap and him were talking about before Hap said he was going to testify, and then before Hap got killed. And Ellie learns of this, and she learns that he switched out the bullets. And she goes, I'm going to throw it out. This isn't. And he goes, no, don't lose your way. It's like, that's such a great.
Yeah. Because, I mean, at that point, she could do that, and it wouldn't really change anything because both of the guilty parties are dead.
Right.
But it's more about, for him, keeping her in a solid mindset, because I'm sure for him, when he turned into someone who would do something where it frames someone in an illegal way, it started off small. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. Yes.
Like small things started creeping in that just probably felt like he knew that it built to bigger things where he's doing illegal things to get his way.
Right. Like even though he's technically his motives are that of a good cop, his methods are sometimes
tainted
and corrupted. And that's a good point about nobody starts being corrupt by just taking $1 billion bribe and then bombing a bunch of people in the Middle East. They do it by, oh shit, I forgot my card. Well, let me just use the company card for this piece of candy. Or that's a good point. And I do think this is I think Nolan's probably the most Hitchcockian movie. It feels like this movie feels like they took it out of the drawer of Hitchcock's desk and they just had the script and they went go for it. Because there are scenes in this that feel like, because Hitchcock would always have a scene in his movies where there'd be no dialogue, but it would be so suspenseful, and he'd always have a sequence like that in the movie. And there's a lot of those sequences in this, but the one in particular where I was like, holy shit, this feels like Hitchcock, is when he goes to the kid's apartment because Walter Finch goes, yeah, he told me that he told Kay that he had a gun, and he kept it in the air vent there. And then Will's like, you son of a bitch, because Will placed that gun in Walter Finch's apartment. Finch found it and put it in the boyfriend's apartment to frame him. So Dormer goes there, and he's turning the place upside down, trying to find this gun. And then the cops come in. If they see him in there, they're gonna be like, "Hey, what's going on here?
Yeah, why are you here?"
And then he goes in the bathroom. He just stands there, and you're going, "Holy shit! This is crazy." And also in that scene, one thing I didn't really like, and is Walter Finch is obviously the most creepy guy ever. Where he's like, yeah, I had a very close and intense friendship with this underage girl who just got murdered. And they're like, makes sense. Like, what?
Keys to the Street and Nolan's Howard Hughes movie. For his next project, Nolan had adapted the novel Keys to the Street by Ruth Rendell.
So I looked up the synopsis for that book, and it's basically this girl comes home and gets abused by her boyfriend, and then she leaves him. And then she goes and meets this guy who he's rich as fuck, but he likes being homeless, and that pisses off her boyfriend, and then some murder is committed, and it's basically a murder mystery. And he said he abandoned it because it was too much like his previous projects. That probably being Insomnia was just another murder mystery. There isn't. You find the script on it online. You can just download it.
After Castle Rock Entertainment acquired the rights, Nolan adapted the book Hughes by Richard Hack. Nolan described it as the best screenplay he'd ever written.
So he was going to have Jim Carrey play Howard Hughes in this movie, and he said the thing that it basically focused on when Howard Hughes in the last half of his life, or I guess the part of his life where he got crazy. I saw this thing where the last photo of Howard Hughes ever taken was taken 25 years before he died, which is insane to think about. And he had all these rules like, I'm going to be in this room, and when the person comes in to talk to me, they have to have 8 napkins in their left hand, and then somebody has to spray this into the room, and then they're going to grab the doorknob with those 8 napkins, not more or less, and then this giant regimen before somebody would have to talk to him because he was just so manic and anxious and nervous. And the guy who wrote the book, Richard Hack, I saw an interview. There's a video that describes that the whole Christopher Nolan's Howard Hughes movie on YouTube, and there's an interview in it where Richard Hack, the author, went on Matt Lauer in the early 2000s, and it's like a 5-minute interview. They're talking. It's really interesting. And he talks about how he went through like 100,000 files to write this book on Hughes, and he goes, yeah, and this and this, and then Matt Lauer goes, all right, I'm gonna have to stop you there. Thank you for coming in. Right now, we're gonna cut to footage of the World Trade Center.
What?
And the interview got interrupted by 9/11.
Dude, why so many things that we talk about on here getting interrupted by 9/11?
The James Cameron podcast we did, we talked about how 9/11 crops up in the documentary Ghost of the Abyss, and that was crazy. I don't know that's such a crazy moment when just all of a sudden 9/11 interrupts something. You're like, oh,
dang. Someone should go through and write all the things.
Just a big documentary about people being like, what? That'd be pretty cool, actually. Not cool, but interesting.
Yeah.
But the reason why the Howard Hughes movie never happened is because while they were sort of putting it together, they found out that Martin Scorsese started production on The Aviator, which is about Howard Hughes that starred Leonardo DiCaprio. So he was like, well, I'm not going to go up against Scorsese. But Nolan said it was the best script he ever wrote. He goes, I'm not gonna say what it was about or anything because, 10 years from now it might be the right movie to do. So we can actually still see that Howard Hughes movie one day. It might be his next movie. He just did Oppenheimer.
Yeah, that would be sweet.
But maybe he just did Oppenheimer. He's like, I'm not gonna do another biopic.
How do we top Oppenheimer?
I'm gonna do a sequel to Tenet called 11 It.
Batman Begins, 2005. While Nolan was looking for his next project, Emma Thomas got a call from Nolan's agent that Warner Brothers was looking for someone to direct their Batman reboot.
Emma Thomas talks about how she learned that they were making a new Batman, and she goes, Nolan, Christopher wouldn't be interested in that because she was thinking of Batman and Robin. You have to forget, Batman was in the public consciousness, he was so different than the Batman we know today.
Yeah.
So they were just thinking George Clooney nipples, what are you talking about? And so, but then she talked to Chris and she goes, yeah, they wanted you to do some Batman thing. He's like, what? And she's like, no, that's awesome. We can do something that's never been done before. Because he had this whole thing where it felt like there was a part of the character that was missing in the cultural zeitgeist or lexicon. It was pretty interesting. And then he went into Warner Brothers and did like a 15-minute pitch. And then they hired him right after the pitch. Like they hired him based off the pitch. And they were like, all right, you can have it. Because there was some other projects. Darren Aronofsky was going to do a Batman Year One, I think, at one point, and there was also going to be another Batman movie, a weird Batman movie with Clint Eastwood as an old Batman. And I heard the plot described for him like, that's weird. I forget. It was going to take place in Tokyo and shit.
Oh wow.
It was strange.
I kind of dig that though. Clint Eastwood as like an old mean.
That'd be pretty funny if they did that now. Clint Eastwood as Batman now, because when he punches people in movies, it's like the slowest punch, but the guys have to sell it and be like,
oh my god.
It's so go watch Cry Macho. It's
Batman
so funny.
would
It's a
just
good
have
movie,
like multiple threesomes.
He's just having sex with prostitutes, like Clint Eastwood does in his
movie
movies
would
now.
start. He'd be in like a brothel, just having
For those who don't know, in The Mule, which is one of Clint Eastwood's movies recently, he just like all the like the hottest women are just like, oh my god, Clint.
Whoa,
They just all want to have sex with him. It's so funny.
Nolan enlisted David S. Goyer to co-write the script.
So David S. Goyer. The reason he went to him is because he was a guy in working in film as a screenwriter and now a director. He directed Blade Trinity, and he obviously was very well versed in the Batman comic universe. So he was like, all right, I need a guy that has a grounding in this universe. And so we hired him, and they talked about how David said, he goes, I can't do this right now. I'm in pre-production. I have to shoot Blade Trinity in 9 weeks. And Nolan was like, all right, fair enough. And then David Goyer gave him some ideas, and then a few days later, Nolan calls, like, you got to do it. So Goyer took some time and figured it out, and they started writing the script together. And there was a funny story where he had a friend who worked at a comic book store, and all of a sudden he came in buying Batman comics one day, and the guy was like, "Well, are you doing a Batman movie?" He's like, "I'm not," because he couldn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
And he's like, "You're doing a Batman movie, you son of a bitch." He goes, "You can't tell me." And then they were they used to go to a diner. What was the meal that Christopher Nolan always used to? He said Christopher Nolan, they would go to the diner every single day for lunch. He would order an omelet with an avocado and cream cheese and something else, like maybe a bagel or some shit. And they were talking about the Batman script, and somebody was like, "Hey, I saw David Goyer and Christopher Nolan, and they were talking about Batman. So if anybody is in that area, try to walk past their table and figure out what they're talking about." Some like people on the internet were doing this, and he was like, "Oh shit,
That's crazy.
that's insane." And it's not even like people who are chronically on the internet now. That's like half the population now. But back then in 2004, 2005, those some crazy people who were chronically on the internet from 2004.
Yeah,
the most boring internet. The YouTube didn't even exist yet.
It was just people. They just had some crappy website.
It was just Creed Bratton typing into Microsoft Word in the office.
After being cast as Batman, Christian Bale gained 100 pounds in preparation for the role.
It's a well-worn story, but I'll describe the details anyway. So he did The Machinist. He was cast as Batman, then lost all the weight from Machinist, got down to 120 pounds. He was 6'1". 6'1", 120 pounds is insane.
Yeah.
And you can look up the pictures. You know what he looked like. And then in 5 months, he had to gain 100 pounds. Fat and muscle, which is in 5 months, that is unheard of and insane. Because he went up to 220, and then he gained too much weight, and then that was the joke where everybody on the set was like, "Hey, we're doing Fat Man or Batman," and then he had to lose some weight to tone up a little bit and get leaner for the movie, which is crazy.
Production got underway in April 2004 with a budget of $150 million, more than 3 times larger than Insomnia's budget.
It's pretty impressive. I mean, obviously we weren't there, so it's hard to say if he got nervous. I'm sure Nolan was nervous, but it's crazy how well composed the whole production felt, given that this is his first big. He went from 46 million right to 150. That's a big difference, and they built some of the biggest, craziest sets I've ever seen. There was in the behind the scenes, they talk about how there was a big, I think was it Shepperton Studios maybe, they filmed in London. They had a big giant warehouse, and they basically made like 6 square blocks of street, and it was 600 feet long or something crazy like that. So everything in the Narrows and that where they're in the poor, shitty part of Gotham is a set basically. And I think we'll get to it, but I think maybe some of the Batman Begins hasn't aged that well in the last 20 years. Maybe it hasn't aged as well something like The Dark Knight. But I think the design of the tumbler and the bats. I think the design of the batsuit's great. I think they obviously were better at lighting it in The Dark Knight than they were in Batman Begins. I think there's some scene in Batman Begins where the batsuit didn't fully escape the sort of campiness and the silliness of the George Clooney Batman. But it's not like glaringly obvious. It's kind of just like sometimes he turns his head at the end of a scene. You're like, I don't know. yeah, exactly.
No, in terms of the budget, though, he actually said in an interview he's glad he kind of got to step up. Memento,
yes,
4,000, Insomnia, 46 million, or 4 million for Memento.
Yeah,
sorry, but he said if he went from Memento straight to Batman, it would have been totally different. So he got sort of a gradual incline to understand how to use the budgets and how to handle everything in terms of a huge movie like that.
Well, he was sort of like the first, because now that's pretty common, but that might have been the first time where a studio gave a big franchise movie to a guy who just did some indie movies. I mean, and then he did Insomnia, of course. But it seems like these days a guy will direct, some movie for like $1 million, and they're like, "Hey, do you want to do Blade?"
Yeah.
or something. Like, that whole thing of just Marvel finding an independent director who made this awesome little movie and then going, hey, you want to make $170 million movie and have no creative control, and then you think it's a terrible experience and nobody likes the movie at the end?
Yeah.
Come work for us,
Ruin your name. Yeah.
So Nolan's and then those guys, they don't really. I think Nolan was probably the first, and also a successful version of that. Of course, successful version, because he's never really lost any creative integrity or control over the years.
Batman Begins was released on June 15th, 2005 to positive reviews. It received an A rating on CinemaScore, but a lukewarm box office run of $373 million worldwide. It was also nominated for Best Cinematography at the Oscars.
So the lukewarm box office, it was success. Like, obviously, it was successful because it had a sequel. But if today a movie came out that was $150 million, and then it made 373, people would go, "Ooh, it probably barely broke even." But I think there's a lot of back then in 2005, movies made more money in ancillary markets like video rentals and stuff like that, and physical media, and obviously since then it's made a giant amount of money because also the merchandising from Batman is a crazy amount of money too. And so I put lukewarm box office, but it's pretty good box office. It's pretty solid for the time. The best cinematography, yeah, Wally Pfister did pretty good. He also was nominated for The Dark Knight as well. I rewatched all of Christopher Nolan's movies 2 years ago, and when I watched Batman Begins, it was the first time where I saw it start to age a little bit, and I was I was sort of scared to revisit it because I'm like, oh, am I not going to think it's good? Because that was 2 years ago, and now it's and I went back to it, and I always realized that there was sort of a lopsidedness in the quality. I always thought that the first half was better than the second. The first half is basically Nolan just putting it. It feels like he just dumped all the nonlinear feel and style from his following in Memento and Insomnia, and just dumped it right into the first half. And it was this cool, icy, nonlinear character origin story. And that was like, that's what a Christopher Nolan Batman movie feels like. That's excellent. And then the second half, the first half is Nolan just trying to put his fingerprint on this movie as much as he possibly can before it has to turn into a conventional Batman movie. Because if you have to remember, this is 2005. You can't go right from Batman and Robin to The Dark Knight. Yeah, I think Batman Begins is a good intermediary or transitory movie in between those two. And I think the second half, like all the stuff that doesn't age well, I think is in the second half. And I think most of the flaws are in the. There's one flaw in the first half, which I guess is sort of the first half.
Which is?
Well, I think the problem I have with the movie, it's sort of like it's more not really a problem, more like a weird quirk I have with the movie is the deaths of both of the Ra's al Ghuls is.
I like that. Let's run with that.
So you have Ken Watanabe who plays the Asian Ra's al Ghul, the bald one, and then you have Liam Neeson who plays the Liam Neeson Ra's al Ghul, I guess.
I guess that's the best way to.
So there's been much debate over the years about Batman at the end. So at the end, they're on the train. Everybody knows what happens in the movie, and Liam Neeson finally Batman beats Ra's al Ghul. And Ra's al Ghul goes, "Do you finally have what it takes to do what is necessary?" Being like, basically like, "Hey, you have to kill me." And Batman goes, "I won't kill you, but I don't have to save you." And then he throws a batarang at a window, I guess, opening it up for Ra's to get out, basically giving him an escape. And then he blows up the train behind him, and then flies out all cool. And then Ra's al Ghul dies. And people, it's been a hotly debated thing, and people say, "Hey, that's not Batman. He would have said that, true Batman would have saved him or whatever." And it makes you question. It makes you. I think I like it or don't like it, but I don't mind it because it intentionally forces or cues the audience into questioning and thinking further about what this Batman's rule around no killing is. Because now it's okay. We get he doesn't kill anybody, but where's the line between not killing anybody and not saving anybody? So I think I like that because it intentionally makes you think more and ponder more about the movie. What I don't like is the first Ra's al Ghul's death. Ra's al Ghul's because so Batman goes, no, I'm not going to kill this guy. I'm no executioner. And Ducard at that point goes, this man is a murderer. And he goes, that's why it's so important. It separates us from them. And he goes on this whole thing where he's like, I'm not going to kill anybody. And then he starts the fire. And then literally a minute later, that Ra's al Ghul dies from a bunch of burning, falling debris as a direct result of the fire that he started. And I'm like, well, that's not intentional like the other one was. That's unintentional. And that makes Batman come across as hypocritical. And I don't really like it that much. I think they should have probably had that Ra's al Ghul die in a more incidental way so that it was less Bruce's fault somehow. It's easier said than done. I can be like, they shouldn't have done that, but I don't know how they would fix that.
It could have just been a way of. I feel like that is a huge part of these movies is that he doesn't kill.
Right.
So maybe it's his way of just making sure it's up in limbo on whether or not he will or that's one of the main struggles about him because it leads back also to his parents getting killed. So,
right.
Which is probably one of the reasons why he doesn't want to kill, obviously.
Yeah.
So it ties in very strongly to his character to keep that little idea up in limbo.
Yeah.
So I think it sets it up good for the whole trilogy.
Even if in the trilogy he does things that would clearly kill somebody in real life, like in the Dark Knight.
Talk.
Yeah, exactly. Like some guy's literally dead. Like there's the scene in the Dark Knight where he runs the tumbler into the garbage truck and the cab gets shot up and scrapes against the top of the ceiling of the underpass in the tunnel. That's kid dead. Dead. But since it's a movie, we're willing to suspend our disbelief. And see, like, okay, he didn't die, But, and also, I don't want to make it seem like I'm shitting on this movie. I do like the movie a lot. I think even if the second half is conventional, and I think it's the least politically matured out of the trilogy, where in Dark Knight you have all these post 9/11 these post 9/11 politics, and then Dark Knight Rises you have all this stuff about class warfare and things like that. And I think in this one it's more of just the political commentary in it isn't very I don't think it's trying to be as valuable or thoughtful as in the Dark Knight or something like that. But because a lot of it's just Rachel driving Bruce Wayne down into the shitty parts of town and being like, things are worse than ever, this is a depression, blah blah blah, and I'm like, that's kind of it kind of feels a little on the nose the way they do that, but mechanically it works within the movie where we have to know these things about the world and the corruption going on, but I think from a political context and I guess a philosophical context, there's not a lot of value in it, which is fine. I don't, and again, it's 2005. There's a lot of things that this movie that the Dark Knight did and the Dark Knight Rises did that were able to do the things that they did because this movie was successful, right? Like one of the things that I talk about is Ra's al Ghul dying follows the rule of like, okay, so the villain knows the hero's identity, so he must die now, right? So that death is pretty predictable in today's standards, but back then it may not have been. I don't know. I don't really remember. I feel like I'm not making any sense.
No, you are.
All right, good, excellent. I'm super smart.
No, but in terms of the political thing that you're talking about too, he mentions in an interview that there are things with terrorism and stuff in the movie that could
Batman Begins.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
But he says wasn't like they weren't thinking about it because of 9/11 and stuff. Like on purpose, he wasn't adding that in. But he said after watching it, he realizes that it might have just been in their subconscious and it.
Ooh, that's actually a good point. That's actually a good point, Danny. No, he snailed me. I went to go fist bump him. But that's good. No, I like that. That the whole thing, because the whole premise of, or thematically about Batman Begins on the surface is fear and getting over fear. You can say that in a post 9/11 world.
Yeah.
A terroristic threat and insinuating fear against the whole city. That's kind of it's pretty good. I'll think about that more. I can't really speak eloquently on it because I haven't
Ever?
thought about it. Have you listened to this podcast?
No.
I don't. But
No,
again, let's talk good about the movie because I really like because I think there's a lot of great stuff in it. I think the Tumblr's awesome. Those scenes are great. I think the Batsuit, the design is good. Again, they light it a little bit weirdly sometimes. And I've seen this movie countless times, and it holds a monumental space in my head, where even if something's bad, I'm still like, oh, this part, you know.
Yeah, maybe we should talk a little bit about like how do you feel about the way he set up Gotham?
In this Gotham had between all the Batman movies, this is the most stylized Gotham because the Dark Knight and the Dark Knight Rises were sort of just New York City or Chicago, let's say. But in this, he said there was a kind of classical or romantic kind of thing thrown in there about the city where they had a CGI building, Wayne Tower, and they had that rail, the monorail that they built that does have this sort of weird Gothic, I don't know if Gothic's but this futuristic kind of Gothic-esque architecture, and it feels like a more comic book movie Gotham. And he said we can't go right to that. We can't go right to having like just a normal city as Gotham. We have to have this intermediary thing, and then we can once people realize or get familiarized with the character, then we can go do the Dark Knight or something like that. So, yeah.
But you liked it overall?
Yeah, I like it. Yeah. I like the Narrows. The Narrows is cool. That feels like Arkham City or something like that.
The Narrows, like that.
That's the poor, shitty spot that.
Yeah.
Where the climax takes place.
Do we see much more of that after this movie? Like those areas of Gotham?
No, we don't see the Narrows again because after that Gotham is just Chicago and shit. I don't know. I feel like now we're just kind of just going, hey, that was good. That was good. But I liked the fact that. I don't know.
The Prestige, 2006. In 2001, Newmarket Films purchased the rights to the novel The Prestige by Christopher Priest and hired Nolan to adapt and direct the story.
So what happened was Christopher Priest wrote the book and published it in 95. Then in 99, he was shopping it around so he can sell the movie rights. And he originally was talking with Sam Mendes, who directed American Beauty. And while right off of Sam Mendes winning, I think he won Best Director for American Beauty, and American Beauty winning Best Picture, won like 7 Oscars or something. They were in talks, and then Christopher Priest got a tape of Following that was going around at the time. And he saw like the first few minutes and was like, no, I want this guy, Nolan, to direct it. Damn. And which is crazy. And then Mendes was like, all right, whatever. So he left. And then Nolan didn't even know this was happening until he got a call saying, hey, you should read this book. And then Nolan read the book a year later. And I think, who got the rights to it? Was it Castle Rock or Newmarket?
Newmarket.
Yeah, so Newmarket got the rights, and they hired him to write and direct it. And then he was going, well, I'm editing Insomnia, and I got to do Batman. So Jonathan Nolan wrote the first few drafts, and then they co-wrote it later when they were after Batman Begins, and he started to actually work on it.
Up next, it says, bring up the inspiration of the Asian magician in the movie.
I thought this was just a funny story. I forget the guy's name, but there was a white guy who was doing Asian face in the Victorian era as a magician, and he was the guy in the movie that in The Prestige, the Asian guy who pretends to be a cripple so he can do his magic. He was based off of this guy who was faking being Asian because people like this exotic magic. They're like, ooh, this Asian magic is crazy. And he would pretend to be Asian that was his thing. That's my joke. I am living out my life as an Asian guy. He would speak whatever, Japanese, Chinese, I forget what it was. But he just wouldn't speak English. And then they did the bullet catch trick on stage, and somebody put a real bullet in there, and he got I'm sorry that I'm laughing that somebody got shot, but he got shot and went, oh, fuck!
And everyone's like, hey!
Those were like the first time anybody heard him speak English. He was like, oh no, something's happened. I've been shot. And people are like, what the fuck is happening?
It's funny to think somebody's pissed off at this guy. Like, I'm going to show him you're not Asian.
Yeah, right?
Shoots him.
Oh, shit.
Oh, fuck.
Those were his last words.
Oh, fuck.
He died.
Oh, my God. Damn. He got exposed and he died?
Yeah, that would suck.
Talk about a bad day.
Can you imagine dying and everybody's pointing at you going, you're white? You're like,
fuck this guy.
God damn it. All right.
Poor fella.
That was pretty funny.
On October 20th, 2006, The Prestige opened to positive reviews from critics, received a B rating on CinemaScore, and made $109 million worldwide off a $40 million budget. It was nominated for Best Cinematography and Best Art Direction at the Oscars.
Best cinematography.
Cinematography.
Tasted so good.
Mhm.
So when there were some preview screenings for that, I think, for critics and at the premiere, and the word of mouth was awful. People were like, "Dude, he really messed up with this one," and Nolan was like, "Well, shit, I made a crappy. I liked it. I guess I made a crappy movie or whatever." And then it came out and everything was fine and it had good reviews. I don't understand why that happened. I don't know what makes a small group of people going, "Fuck this movie," and then all of a sudden everybody likes it later. The first time I watched this movie blew me away because obviously it has like the most insane plot twist of all time, which is that Alfred Borden was a twin the whole time. And I remember being so invested in this movie that I was acting like such an asshole. My parents were out, and I was maybe 12 or 13 home alone, so my parents were a little nervous, whatever. And I guess they sent our friend Mary Movihill over to go come check on me. And in her mind, she's doing a nice thing, like checking on her friend's kid and doing a nice thing to me. And in my mind, I'm being like, I'm trying to watch this awesome movie, dude. And then she's talking to me, going like, yeah, so blah blah blah. And I'm going, oh my god, like watching the movie. And what a little piece of shit I was, dude.
Yeah.
Anyway, great movie. Let's move on. No, but I really think The Prestige. Paul Thomas Anderson talked about the premises for Memento and Insomnia and how they're great. I think the premise for this is it's almost like comically good because Paul Thomas Anderson said anytime you can get to some kind of Tom and Jerry conflict, it's going to work out. And that's exactly what this movie is. It's just you're basically watching Tom and Jerry, played by Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale, just trying to sabotage and getting up in all these hijinks. And the theatricality and, I guess, drama around following these magicians is so perfect for a movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like they're doing all these illusions and they're all just tricking each other. And it's such a perfect, juicy story, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think we talked about the nonlinear stuff. I forgot this was nonlinear. I was like, oh, The Prestige, there's a plot twist, but it's told pretty much in order. And then I watched it, and I've seen it like 4 or 5 times. So I was like, holy shit, this might be his most nonlinear movie. Because I saw somewhere that it has like 146 jump cuts in it that go to a different timeline, which is like 1 per minute. So it goes to a different timeline 1 time a minute, roughly, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the genesis behind the overall nonlinearity is kind of maybe the most mysterious, because we know in Memento the nonlinear stuff comes from his brain, Leonard's short-term memory. We know in Inception it comes from the infiltration of dreams and that dream technology, right? But in this, it initially comes from, we're watching the movie from the excerpts of Alfred Borden and Robert Angier's diaries that are being read by each other, right? But then at one point in the movie, probably near the two-thirds, we find out that both of those diaries are basically a trick being played on the other. So imagine if you wrote a diary and I was basing my whole life off of it, and at the end I go, hey, fuck you, I did this to mess with you, pal.
Yeah.
And then you did the same thing to me later. It would be like, whoa. But then once we realize that all those diaries are kind of a trick, we're still in this nonlinear thing where we're moving around time, but there's no, we enter these flashbacks within flashbacks within flashbacks, and they kind of loop around until we can't really trace the ancestry of like how did we get here?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But you never feel like you're lost. You just feel like you're being manipulated and deceived, and this illusion is being created around the movie. The movie works as one big magic trick. Because the whole thing with the magic trick is when you see it from another angle, you're seeing how it works, and this whole movie is filled with all these really clever metaphors and doubles and narrative echoes. And then when you watch it a second or third time, you get to see all of those from a different angle. And they go, oh, wait, this even is different from what I thought. Nolan talked about how, who was it? I think it was M. Night Shyamalan talking about The Sixth Sense. Or maybe Roger Ebert, or somebody who was talking about the movie. And they said the smartest thing ever. Oh, maybe it was his editor, Dottie Dorn, who did, Dottie, yes, she did Memento. And she said plot twists work really well when they make what you've already seen better. Because there's a lot of plot twists where like, hey, it was all a dream.
Mm-hmm.
great. So all the stuff we just watched didn't make any doesn't matter, right? So stuff like that. So that's very important for the Prestige because the Prestige follows that to a T. And I mentioned, and this is something I didn't really catch until now because I never really thought about this movie in a political context before, but I think I sort of found one in the Prestige this time in relation to The Machine, because people criticize the movie because it's a pretty cool cat and mouse game with these two guys, until all of a sudden this machine that clones people just showed up and it felt weird, and it didn't, it felt like a science fiction movie all of a sudden, right? And I understand why people think that. I even thought that the first few times I watched it. I'm like, yeah, it is kind of weird how the machine actually clones people and it's not a magic trick. But I think thematically it works because the whole time it's I should probably credit this for Christopher Priest, the author, because setting this story in the Victorian era around 1890s, let's say, that's such a genius idea, because that was a time where Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla were traveling around the world, showing everybody their new inventions, which is essentially magic.
Mm-hmm.
They were, the electrification, if that's a word, of the world.
Yeah.
And all these gadgets that they were coming up with, regular people were just being like, this is basically just magic to us,
Mm-hmm.
1897, this movie takes place sometimes. 1903, the plane was invented. 6 years away. You'd ask people back then, hey, are we going to fly in a couple of years? Like, no, that's magic, right? The moon landing, the nuclear bomb, that's all magic to these people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at this world that's on the cusp of a modern age. And I think The Machine represents the actual magic that science makes or whatever. I don't know if that's the best way to explain it, but does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, but the thing I mentioned that the rivalry between Alfred Borden and Robert Angier is an allusion to the rivalry of Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla, where I mentioned that they basically are going around the country or around the world and showing people their new inventions, which are essentially can be tricks. Right, it's the same gist, and they're both going around, but they're also sabotaging each other. They're also at war, trying to steal each other's things, trying to get on top and be the better guy. And I think that was a thing that I never really considered before as an allusion to those guys. I think I hope that all made sense, but the way it kind of captures that moment, I think is really good.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another interpretation that I have that I wouldn't argue and say I know this for a fact, but I think there is a loose interpretation to nuclear weapons in this, sort of like a precursor to Oppenheimer. And I don't know if it was intentional, but even if it wasn't intentional, it's subconsciously, like you mentioned with Batman Begins and terrorism earlier. It doesn't matter if it was intentional because it's in the movie, so it's all game for interpretation, right? So The Machine is basically this giant thing that's like, holy, this changes, because you go from magic tricks to actual replication in cloning technology.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a big leap, and it's so jarring that people think it doesn't fit the story. You can make the same assumption with the same thing with nuclear bombs now. What? That's a giant leap, right? It's a giant leap that kind of exists outside. It's such a giant leap that seems like it's years and years ahead and doesn't belong in the story, right? But I think The Machine kind of represents nuclear weaponry because Nikola Tesla tells Robert Angier, like, forget about this obsession. It'll only bring you misery. Man's reach exceeds his grasp. Basically meaning, yes, man has the ability to create these types of machines, but we are not advanced enough to control them, and using them too hastily will result in our self-destruction, right? Of course, that's the threat of self-destruction is always there with nuclear bombs, but it's also suggested by the way Robert Angier keeps killing the clones of himself in order to be the better magician over Borden, right? So there's that. So it's loose. It's not like, I'm not saying I have all the answers to this movie. It's an interpretation and an interesting way of looking at the movie, and it might be a loose interpretation. It might not work some ways, but I think there's something to that.
The Dark Knight, 2008. Warner Brothers had greenlit plans for a Batman sequel back in 2005, and after The Prestige, Nolan enlisted his brother Jonathan to co-write the script.
So, like The Prestige, like The Dark Knight, like The Dark Knight Rises, Nolan got his brother Jonathan to do the first couple of drafts, and then they would subsequently write it together. And one of the things he talked about he said, when Jonathan gave me the first draft of the script, it was this big giant thing that we had to trim down. But the thing that was there from the very beginning was the Joker, the character of the Joker, that was working very well. He goes, I told him he has to be like an agent of chaos, and he should be Jaws from Jaws.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny the way...
Just weaving his way through the movie and just like a wrecking ball.
Mm-hmm. It's funny the way how he kind of like shits on his brother's script in a slight way. Just like, yeah, it was really long. We had to trim it down into a workable script. But there was one good thing about it.
Yeah, I salvaged what I could, but the Joker was pretty good. Also, I like how I said Nolan said he has to be like Jaws from Jaws. As if Jaws would be from any other movie.
Jaws from... Nolan had originally considered Heath Ledger for Batman. Ledger turned down a chance to audition.
I think when Nolan talked to Heath Ledger about doing Batman, Heath Ledger sort of had a similar sentiment that Emma Thomas did, where she was like, Batman, what?
Mm-hmm.
George Clooney Batman? No.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of took him some convincing on the part of Batman Begins to join the universe. And I think joining the universe as somebody like the Joker is probably what intrigued him. Nolan didn't have any other choice for the Joker. He was just, no, it's going to be Heath Ledger. Which obviously famously was crazy controversial at the time because he was just in Brokeback Mountain and people were like, I'm going to be watching the screen and try not to picture the Joker having sex with Batman. And I'm like, I think this is a you problem, dude. What?
Sounds like you got some things you got to work out in your own mind if all you can think about is that. Production began in April of 2007, and The Dark Knight was the first time IMAX cameras were used for a narrative project.
So IMAX cameras were just used for things like nature documentaries, and when James Cameron got that invitation to go see that documentary for Titanic when he was considering making Titanic, that was IMAX footage as well, I believe. And Nolan says it's the best photographic format in the world, or best film format in the world. And I didn't know this. The resolution for it is like 18K. Wow. Which
18K?
is 18, which is nuts.
You can't even like notice anything past
it's just you can just zoom in and the quality will still be so good. But that was a big deal, is using them for a narrative. And I think because Nolan's used IMAX for The Dark Knight, then he didn't use it for Inception, but he used it for Dark Knight Rises, then he used it for Interstellar and all the movies since then. But I think somewhere around maybe Interstellar, when you watch the IMAX in The Dark Knight, basically what IMAX feels like, if you look at an individual frame of the original film negative of a movie, I know somebody posted the original negative of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, and they posted in every individual frame. When you see the frame, there's so much detail, and it looks awesome because you're seeing it stop. So you have more of a chance to see the detail in the frame. But what IMAX looks like that every single time.
Yeah.
Where it looks like you're looking at that frame, especially The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. Because I don't know what it was, but I think the IMAX looked better in those two movies than it does in the rest of Nolan's filmography. Mm-hmm. There's something about it where you look at the tunnel sequence, the tunnel chase in The Dark Knight, and when after the tumbler gets blown up, and it's smoking, and it's just sitting there. All the homeless guys are looking at it, and they're just creeping in. That shot, like the way the IMAX looks in this, has such a distinct feel that I think that I don't know if it's as clear anymore. Maybe I've just gotten used to it, but if I've gotten used to it, I wouldn't feel that it feels different in The Dark Knight.
And do you know why? Do you know why this is the first time it's been used in a narrative project?
Because the IMAX, since it's first of all, the camera is like 80. It's something, I don't know if it's 80 pounds, but it's very, very heavy, and it's very big, but it's also very loud.
Yeah.
So it's hard to film for dialogue scenes. There's some dialogue scenes that they've used it for in Nolan's movies, but you can always notice the aspect ratio changing for dialogue scenes, like things like Oppenheimer. Mm-hmm. You can see.
The marketing campaign for The Dark Knight was notably crazy as hell.
So I didn't know how to explain it. Like,
this made me sound like such a nerd. Was notably crazy as hell. Crazy as heckaroon.
So what they did is it was basically like a weird guerrilla viral marketing campaign where instead of sending Christian Bale to Comic-Con or something like that, they had a bunch of, they had like 10,000 or 11,000 $1 bills.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the $1 bills, they don't say United States of America on the bottom. They say, "Why so serious?"
Mm-hmm.
And George Washington's face is like Jokerized.
Yeah.
And they handed that out at Comic-Con and made that actual money that was being passed through the vendors.
Oh shit.
Which is like, I don't know how the moral
Yeah,
qualms
yeah,
of
yeah.
some guy selling something for $1, then getting a Joker dollar and being like, well, shit, you know. But that got people talking, and then there was another thing where these people, they were being led on like a scavenger hunt, and there was another thing where they had a website dedicated to Harvey Dent's campaign. You can vote for him on the website.
Oh, that's cool.
And if you, and once you shared it enough, the pixelation on the picture of Harvey Dent would diminish, and it would turn into a picture of the first look at the Joker.
Oh,
And then Aaron Eckhart in real life as Harvey Dent was at campaigns going, "Vote for me.
Really?
Yeah.
Damn.
If you vote for me, the Dark Knight will be awesome."
Mm-hmm.
And then and stuff like that. And then they also had a Jokerized version of the trailer where if you did some secret scavenger hunt, you can get a version of the trailer where the Joker would like draw over Batman's face and be like, "I suck,"
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm. On July 18th, 2008, The Dark Knight opened.
Oh, they had people were going around. I'm sorry. I just forgot about this.
Okay, go.
People were going around to because the Dark Knight was coming out during an election cycle for the president. It was Obama and John.
Joe Biden. No.
No, John
McClane.
John McClane. John McClane from Die Hard.
No,
John McCain. And so people were going to their actual political events and
Yeah,
rallies
yeah,
and
yeah.
debates and holding up "I believe in Harvey Dent" signs.
Yeah, that's good.
And they were actually like people protesting with it was crazy.
That's funny. I wonder if we look up how many votes Harvey Dent got in the
Yeah.
presidential
Do you think he got more votes than Harambe did in 2016?
No shot, pal. You know who I voted
he only
for.
needs 11,000. Did you vote for Merlin Supreme?
Yeah, the guy with the boot on his head. Is that him?
That guy was so funny. Why does he run again?
Didn't he say like a vote for me is a vote wasted or something?
I don't
and
know.
People still voted for him.
Shit.
On July 18th, 2008, The Dark Knight opened to excellent reviews, an A rating on CinemaScore, and grossed just over $1 billion worldwide. It was nominated for 8 Oscars and won 2 for Best Sound Editing and for Heath Ledger's performance.
So I mentioned Batman Begins was a very influential comic book movie, and it started to get, and it helped people take those movies more seriously.
Mm-hmm.
That The Dark Knight did that tenfold.
Yeah.
Because this was the first one that was it was an awards. It was should have been nominated for Best Picture. People realized because when in 2008 was the last year, or 2009 Oscars, I guess, were the last year where they nominated 5 movies only for Best Picture, and then after that they increased it to it could be anywhere from 5 to 10, right? Because I think the Academy was sort of acknowledging maybe the Dark Knight probably should have been nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah.
And well, I think it obviously should have, but the Academy was like, yeah, maybe it should. I don't know. They they're not going to come out and say that, but it was sort of an awards darling, and it won a major award, which is Heath Ledger's performance. That's a pretty big deal. And people say, "Oh, it's the greatest comic movie of all time." I think it is, but I genuinely think that's one of the best movies of the 21st century.
Yeah.
And I explained how I was afraid to go back to Batman Begins because I'm like, oh, did I only like this because I was young, and maybe now that I'm older and wiser, I don't want to. I might not like it as much. That movie's going to hold up forever. That's genuine. That genuinely is great because that movie, right? I'm gonna read off the notes. Let me read off the notes.
Get your notes up, and I'll just say, in terms of movies, you're like this guy who knows everything about movies. I feel like this is one of your moments in time where it just set you on the path to movies.
Right.
Right?
Well, there's a few movies that I've watched. It's funny that all the movies I watched religiously were comic book movies growing up. But Spider-Man, I watched all the Spider-Man movies I watched millions of times. Those are probably more responsible for what my idea of a movie is than any other movie. This I also watched probably more times than Batman Begins. I watched this movie so much. I used to come home from school and watch it on the DVR that when I watched it this time, 10, 12 years later, I was waiting for the commercial breaks where Lucius Fox would go, "Mr. Wayne, good luck." And then I go, commercial. Oh,
Yeah.
there's no commercial. I remembered every
Right,
single
yeah,
commercial break in the movie. So, and I'm so excited to talk about this movie, and I'm so scared that I'm going to mess it up.
Can
so
I
I'm
can
gonna
I
read
say
off my
one
notes.
thing
Yes.
before you start
Yes.
reading your notes? This is also crazy. One time we were in high school and we were bored because like there was nothing going on in class, and you recited the whole movie. And we didn't have enough time, so you're like, "You want me to just do the Joker parts?" And we all sat there and listened to you do the Joker scenes.
I just did only the Joker's
Yeah,
lines.
yeah. And we all were sitting there like, like that's how good of a movie it is that you could just. I mean, also the fact that you remembered the whole movie was just crazy.
If you're wondering what I did in high school, I was the annoying kid who thought he was the Joker in high school, who always thought he had the best Joker impression. I would literally walk around and voluntarily go, "Yo, you want to see my Joker impression?"
Yeah.
So, okay, there's a movie called The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, where Jimmy Stewart plays a character who's made a political career out of shooting a local brigand named Liberty Valance. However, as the movie flashbacks to when he was young, the conflict he and Liberty Valance play out, the audience learns that he didn't shoot Liberty Valance. It was actually a character played by John Wayne, right? And they go, "Hey, maybe what are we gonna do? Like he just told us that he wasn't him that shot Liberty Valance. He's built his career off this." And the journalist is asking, I think it's the newspaper men are talking about it, and then they go, "Print the legend," saying like it's better if you just print that he was a great guy rather than the truth, because the truth would be harmful to the community. This is a concept that The Dark Knight grapples with in Harvey Dent's character, and what is interesting is that the movie takes the opposite approach to this moral ambiguity as Insomnia did. We talked about how Will Dormer was faced with the choice of lying to keep criminals behind bars, but because of the truth comes out, all of his work will be undone. The same thing happens between Gordon and Batman and Harvey Dent. However, in Insomnia, Dormer can't live with the guilt, and he tells Ellie to tell the truth, and he tells her not to lose her way. A more conventional philosophy and rigid philosophy. However, in The Dark Knight, Gordon and Batman choose to lie in order to protect Harvey's image so that everyone he locked up can stay in jail, and he takes the fall for Harvey's murders. It's a more complicated and morally ambiguous sentiment. The Dark Knight and Insomnia were released only 6 years apart. Why did this change? The Dark Knight was filmed April to November 2007, and Insomnia was filmed in April to June 2001, only months before 9/11. I think 9/11 catalyzed a shift in these philosophies within Nolan's filmography. The world changes. Things aren't so black and white anymore as they are in Insomnia. Suddenly, the world was shown that chaos can erupt at any minute and that civilization can come crashing down in an instant. The Dark Knight's connection with 9/11 is further suggested in the Joker, who in the comics is usually an insane mob boss. But what the Nolan brothers did to fit his image into a post-9/11 world was to make him a domestic terrorist. He is an agent of the chaos we saw on 9/11. And in the Joker, Batman witnesses a new kind of threat, which causes Batman to utilize this new fascistic technology around the sonar, which basically invades people's privacy in order to find the Joker's location. And I think this can be basically that can be compared with how the U.S. reacted with the Patriot Act after 9/11, basically. And The Dark Knight's an interesting movie because both left-wing people were saying, oh, it's saying left-wing things, and both right-wing people were saying, no, it's saying right-wing things, right? So it's sort of this prism for interpretation where people go down the middle and see and then project their philosophies onto it, which is pretty interesting.
And the difference between the themes, I guess, I would point out is that, like, Insomnia deals with a more individual view. Like, he doesn't want her as an individual to be tainted.
Right.
But in terms of The Dark Knight, it views as a whole, like he's thinking more about the whole mindset of the whole city.
Right.
Feeling that they need something that Batman couldn't give them.
Right. Like, Insomnia is contained within Dormer's career. In Batman, it's all of Gotham that's going to be affected by this. Yeah. That smile you did. Hold on, let me. I further say here, the same way how Batman not saving Ra's al Ghul leads to the moral ambiguity in Batman's philosophy in that movie, The Dark Knight is full of these ambiguities. So, for example, we already talked about the moral ambiguity of Batman taking the fall for Harvey's crimes. However, we also see this ambiguity in the dilemma of the two ships, where one can blow up the other. It highlights how we as a people will react when a 9/11 happens. Another ambiguity is when Alfred burns the letter from Rachel in order to spare Bruce's pain. The Dark Knight is the greatest superhero movie of all time, blah, blah, blah. Yes, 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 yes.
And yes, it is the great. And in my opinion, it is. I mean, obviously, just the best villain.
And also the Joker and Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men. They're sort of like similar characters in the same way, where they're both represented sort of 9/11. Because Cormac McCarthy, who wrote the novel No Country for Old Men, that was basically No Country for Old Men is all about this world's crazy. I'm too old for this shit. I gotta get out of here. That's another book that's basically about a post 9/11 world. And Anton Chigurh represents the same thing, sort of the same thing in No Country for Old Men that the Joker represents in The Dark Knight. Also, let's just talk about how this movie will never age. There's 2 shots in the movie where there's noticeable CGI, and it's not even that bad. There's the shot when Batman goes under the truck when the Joker is driving it, and he goes under and flips it over. The bat pod rides up the wall, then twists, and then comes down. When it twists up, you can tell it's CGI, but it's not like awful. And then there's the shot of the helicopter that comes down earlier, and it's like you can barely tell.
Small, quick things.
Yeah, but they use practical effects everywhere. It's like the way they flipped the truck, they had a giant piston that would just slam on the ground and then flip the truck over and shit.
Yeah, and that's in the same scene. Isn't that the same scene where there's like Batman? It's something Batman's in it, but Heath Ledger's just there skating.
No, I think that's a fake picture.
Oh, is
they
it? No,
they photoshopped the skateboard.
I thought it was real. I was like, that'd be sick.
Because that shot is when the Joker jumps on, because Batman like runs into the truck and then falls off the bike.
Damn.
And then Joker jumps over him. They just used a screenshot of that and put a skateboard there.
Damn.
Yeah.
Inception, 2010. Years earlier, Nolan had originally pitched Inception as a horror movie to Warner Brothers. Years later, this idea became a heist movie in the world of corporate espionage.
So when he was at the boarding school in Halle Berry, the actress, Halle Berry, he said that he had an idea about a horror movie about people stealing other people's dreams. And then he also talked about when he was at, I think, UCL, he would go out drinking with his friends at night, and he would come home super late, but he paid for the breakfast in advance that the college would provide, and he didn't want to miss it, so he would wake up and eat breakfast and then go back to bed and wake up at like 2 p.m. And he said he was always so tired during those times, and he would always be in this weird sleeplessness, dreamy state. And he talked about how he would have these lucid dreams, and that also inspired part of the thing about, like, he had a lucid dream that he went and opened a book and started reading it, and then he subsequently realized, wait, my brain was creating that book and reading it at the same time. That's the whole thing about Inception, where you're creating but also witnessing and experiencing this world at the same time. They talk about Cobb, Leonardo DiCaprio, draws that graph where he has 2 arrows going around in a circle, and then the line cuts through the 2 arrows, and he goes, that's where we operate.
Filming got underway in June 2009 and was Nolan's most globe-trotting production yet.
Yeah, they filmed in like 5 cities. I forget exactly, but they filmed in Calgary, Canada, I believe, for the icy mountain or the snowy mountain scenes, and they filmed in Paris and other places like that. And the deal was, okay, you just made The Dark Knight, so you have some freedom. But he made a deal with Warner Brothers. If you let me make this movie, I'll do the 3rd Dark Knight. Because he never really wanted to do sequels. He never went into a Dark Knight or a Batman movie going, all right, but in the next one we're going to do this. Yeah. He always just wanted to make the one he was making. And people later speculated that he didn't really even want to make The Dark Knight Rises. Maybe he wouldn't have if he didn't get to do this movie, Yeah. But the production's very interesting because they talked about how for the Zero Gravity, first of all, giant production, giant original movie, success. I mean, made a bunch of money. It was a big deal. But there was a great behind the scenes they have of it where they're talking about how they filmed the Zero Gravity scenes in particular with Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And they talked about how they use multiple methods for doing that so people wouldn't spot how they're doing it. Because if you use cables for every single shot, the person's go, oh, they're using cables. But if you attach them to some weird arm rig, like he's a camera, and move him around like that, they did the same thing on Interstellar, where they would use a different techniques to kind of hide how they're doing the zero G exactly. There was another thing where they actually built that compound on top of the snow mountain, and then in real life they were like, all right, so we set the charges, it's going to blow up and the tower's going to fall this way, it's going to be nice. And then they blew it up and the tower fell the other way. And they're like, well, shit. So they had to build a miniature in Los Angeles in a parking lot. And they blew that one up and it did the same thing.
Did they at least set a camera up to maybe get the right shot this time?
Yeah. Well, so that explosion's a mix of miniature and stuff. I think, let's keep going. I think this movie is Nolan going. I'm not saying it is a generic blockbuster, but in terms of the CGI and stuff, I think it's the closest Nolan ever got to generic blockbuster territory.
Mm-hmm. But when you think of it, this is sort of a story that needs the CGI.
Yeah, especially in the limbo sequences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's basically the part I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. On July 16th, 2010, Inception opened to positive reviews, a B+ on CinemaScore, and made $828 million worldwide off a $160 million budget. It received 8 nominations and 4 wins at the Oscar, and was the first Nolan movie to be nominated for Best Picture.
So that's a big deal. This was another awards darling. Basically the first awards darling that was up for a bunch of Oscars, including Best Picture, where The Dark Knight probably should have. Maybe they gave it Best Picture as a apology to Nolan for not nominating The Dark Knight.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how true that is, but I've seen Inception about 4 times, and the first time I watched it, I'm like, pretty crazy, and then by the time I watched it the second time, like, I don't remember anything of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then I watched it again. I'm like, all right, nice. Now I got it. And then the third time, I'm like, I don't remember anything. Why? for some reason, in all of Nolan's movies and his filmography, I think about Inception the least. I don't know why. It's strange because every time I watch it, I'm like, that's such a smart decision. And the characters are very good. I think what Inception does right is it has this big, giant, original idea that feels like it's on the cusp of the bleeding edge of where storytelling is going, which is something that nobody's ever done before. And I think Tenet did the same thing. But I think objectively, Inception is probably a better movie because it had the characters are very strong, and there's actual value and weight to what's going on with the character relationships in that movie. And Tenet I like a lot because I have a soft spot for it, and it's a big math problem, and we'll get to that when we talk about Tenet. But Inception, I think it's great, but I don't know why it doesn't have staying power in my mind. Hopefully it'll stay this time, and I appreciate it on a filmmaking scale and the effort that was put into it. And I think all the characters are great. I think the conversation he has with Maul at the end, he's like, "I have to let you go now." It's saying things about grief and loss and stuff like that, and I think it's very, very compelling.
Yeah, the whole thing with his wife is very, I remember feeling really just it hit hard.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that just hits really hard because, them going through all that together and then it ultimately being her demise is just something that really is powerful because, it drives him for the whole movie basically.
Right.
Just,
and then you learn that he was basically the one that inceptioned her into thinking that the reality wasn't real in the first place, which ultimately led to her killing herself. That's also not a dilemma, but I guess a crazy situation where your wife frames you for murder and goes jump with me. Because the whole point is if we die, we're going to go to the real world because she thinks the real world is a dream. So she goes, she makes a hotel room look like there was a big fight, and then she stages it so it looks like he pushes her. And she goes, I'm going to jump. And if you don't jump, you're going to go to jail, pal. And he's like, and then you see her jump. And Leonardo DiCaprio's like, he goes, oh, Jesus Christ. You're like, oh, man, that's rough. And then when she's crying at the end, they're in the limbo, and he's like, I have to let you go. Goddamn, dude.
Yeah,
I do think this started because when you have a new, unique premise like Inception, like going into dreams, obviously that warrants a lot of exposition. And I think that started not an exposition problem that Nolan has, but kind of a trend in Inception and Tenet where a lot of it is, Inception, there's a lot of exposition, but you kind of forgive it because it's like, all right, this is a premise that I've never seen before. I'm willing to accept. In Tenet, there's a lot of exposition, and there's not a lot of character. I don't want to spend too much time on Inception, but
Yeah, that's we'll talk about that with Tenet. That was one of my things where it kind of lost me in a way.
It's also weird that I don't find it that. I mean, I find it super compelling, but it's weird that it doesn't stick in my brain because one of the things about that I like about the relationship between movies and dreams is that they sort of have the same function in our brains. Where I heard somebody describe somebody going, "There's a reason why when you go to see a scary movie with your kid, you go, it's and they're scared. You go, it's don't worry, it was only a movie." And then when your child wakes up from a nightmare, you go, "Don't worry, it was only a dream." Because the interpretation of dreams and the interpretations of movies is kind of the same system.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Nolan recognized that there was some kind of link between movies and dreams. Because if you look at this is like a well-known thing. If you look at the heist, the team, they represent the team in making movies. So Leonardo DiCaprio would be the director. Joseph Gordon-Levitt would be the producer. Tom Hardy would be the actor. Ariadne would be the production designer, and then Sato, Ken Watanabe, the rich guy, would be the studio with all the money, and then Cillian Murphy, Robert Fisher would be the audience because and they give him a character arc in the movie. It's almost like they're writing his story. It's like almost like a movie within a movie.
What? No sound guy?
No, the sound's not important apparently.
The Dark Knight Rises, 2012. Nolan was hesitant to do a third Batman movie because he thought that third sequels usually weren't good.
Yeah, he talked about how it's funny how because you think Christopher Nolan's this very austere, scholarly guy, and he goes there's not really that many good third movies in a trilogy. Maybe I don't know Rocky 3,
Yeah.
which Rocky 3 is pretty good. It might be the best one, but it's just funny to hear him say that. It's sort of like him saying that he's a fan of the Fast and Furious franchise. Where he is, I've seen a clip of him where he's talking a whole conversation like, no, start with Tokyo Drift because something happens in that's pretty crazy at the end. And he actually likes those movies, which I like them too.
Dude, I love those movies. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Tom Hardy, Marion Cotillard were cast after working with Nolan on Inception.
Yes. So Joseph Gordon-Levitt, of course, plays the allusion to Robin. I guess his name is just Robin. But
Yeah.
Tom Hardy was on before there was even a script.
Nice.
He just went, "Oh, you want me to be the villain? Yeah, I'm in. Don't even worry about it." And then Marion Cotillard they moved because she was pregnant, and Nolan moved the production around so that they filmed her scenes 5 months later near the end of photography, I guess, so she can be in the movie. Yeah, I don't know if is there anything else to say about the lead up?
I mean,
I don't know. Well, when they were writing the movie, again, Nolan had Jonathan Nolan write the movie, and Jonathan gave the script back to Chris and goes, "Here, it's going to be A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens," and he goes, "Oh, it's a great idea. I've never read the novel, but basically the premise is this guy gets out of jail, or he's in jail for 18 years, and it's basically set against the backdrop of the events that led to the French Revolution, which is a thing about class politics and class divisions and class conflicts that exist in The Dark Knight Rises."
Filming began in May 2011 with a giant budget of $250 million.
Nolan talked about how can we go bigger with, we can't go smaller or stay the same. We have to go bigger with the scale. It has to be, and Jonathan Nolan said, well, why don't we just do the thing that the villain was threatening to do in Dark Knight? Why don't we just make Gotham as a society collapse? And they're like, well, shit, that's a pretty good idea. And in the production, a lot of the things that they were doing, like the bat wing or the bat, they just flew that around the city on cables a lot of the times. The thing where it comes out of the alleyway like a rat in a trap, gentlemen. And the guy goes, "I think you have the wrong animal there, sir." And you see the bat come out of the alleyway and go all the way up into the sky. They had like a 600-foot long zip line cable thing that they just pulled that thing out of. Anybody else would just do CGI, but they actually did that. There's a crazy clip of Anne Hathaway stunt woman on the bat pod, and there's footage of her going down the stairs on the bat pod and running into one of the IMAX cameras, just clocking it,
Destroying it?
I don't know if it just got destroyed. It probably got destroyed, but she hit it pretty hard. That was pretty nuts. And then there was another scene where they were dragging the Batwing through the city, and it hit a building, and got one of the wings clipped off.
Oh my god!
So a lot of the production was stuff like that, where it was a giant, like Batman, The Dark Knight was giant on the scale that it was all over the city, but most of the scenes were contained to one part of the city. But this scenes would go across the entire city and shit like that, you know?
Yeah, it's very broad. It shows the whole scale of the city.
Yeah, and 250 million production. That's a giant production. That's like a $300 million movie now.
On July 20th, 2012, The Dark Knight Rises opened to positive reviews, an A rating on CinemaScore, and made over $1 billion at the box office. It was Nolan's first movie since Insomnia not to receive any Oscar nominations.
This was the first Nolan movie I saw in theaters. My sister Chris took me to see this, and I remember seeing this and just being like, holy shit, I didn't know Batman was this cool, because I used to be so scared of the Joker. When the commercials for The Dark Knight were on, I remember going, oh no! And I would cover my eyes because I was super deathly afraid of the Joker. And so this was pretty cool to see. It was a cool memory. But it made more than The Dark Knight. It made less domestically, but more worldwide than The Dark Knight. And, opening day came out, July 20th? Opening day, obviously, of course, at the midnight screening, the Aurora shooting happens. It still made $1 billion. I don't know how much that affected the box office. I like to think that maybe if that didn't happen, it would have made maybe somewhere closer to 1.2. I mean, it probably would have just affected domestic numbers, really. But, I can't. It's hard to say. And, but yeah.
I forgot about that whole entire thing.
Yeah, I remember when I was writing that up, I forgot about that too. What do you think of this movie?
I mean, I loved it. I mean, I feel like it's a good way to cap off the trilogy. And also, I have pretty good memories of. I was in Myrtle Beach. And I saw it at the movie theater at Broadway on the beach with a bunch of my friends from baseball, and we just came out. You know how I am when I leave a movie, I just want to be that character from the movie.
Yeah.
I remember coming out and then having to go play baseball and just feeling like I'm
tending to be dark and mysterious.
Yeah. Just wanting to be Batman for some reason.
Yeah.
But
this is one of those movies I watched because I used to, when I was in high school, I used to watch movies on my Kindle. I would just go under my covers in my bed and watch movies. And I watched this a bunch of times. And even obviously I think it's great. But even then I would still realize some of this is kind of because Nolan talks about how he had to increase the scale. And it's almost like in increasing the scale, he kind of exposed some cracks around the filmmaking where on a grand scale, the filmmaking's fantastic. But I think there's a lot of weird little things where in The Dark Knight, in the opening scene of The Dark Knight, the Joker shoots a guy and you see the ballistics go off on the guy, and you see the smoke from the impact of the bullets or the dust go off, and they glisten in the lighting. But in this movie, whenever somebody gets shot, a lot of the times, you just see them go, ugh, but you don't see any bullet impacts. Like when they're in the plane, the guys are coming down on the cable, and he shoots one of the guys with the gun. The guy just goes, ugh, but you don't see. You just it's weird. The way the guy who's an allusion to Deathstroke. The guy who's on the bridge and goes, if one person steps across this bridge, Gotham gets blown to hell. He was the sniper in the one scene where they find the senator with Catwoman or whatever. He was the sniper in the alley. So people say, oh, he's sort of this universe's Deathstroke. Talia al Ghul is getting into one of the tumblers or getting into getting into a tumbler or a truck. And as she's getting in, he just gets shot, and you can barely tell he got. It's weird. There's an unpolished thing around the edges, around some of the action, that I think is strange.
I will say about this movie, when it comes to The Dark Knight, if we were done with this podcast and you said you want to watch The Dark Knight, I'd be like, yeah, let's watch it.
I can.
Dark Knight Rises. If you said it, I'd probably be like, yeah.
No, Dark Knight Rises slaps, dude.
I still love it, but for some reason, it doesn't have the same rewatchability as The Dark Knight.
Well, The Dark Knight's just machine. Dude.
Yeah.
And you just get right through it. It's like Dark Knight and Goodfellas are they're 2.5 hours, but they cut like butter, and you go right through them. I think with the political maturity of the Dark Knight Rises, in The Dark Knight, the Joker was an agent of chaos, and he was the chaos that we glimpsed during 9/11. And I think in this, because in the same way that the reaction to 9/11 from the government was the Patriot Act, just the way that Batman reacts to the Joker with the sonar device. I think the Dark Knight Rises reacts to the chaos of the Dark Knight by shifting the villain towards a more authoritarian view where Bane doesn't make the city chaos a place without rules. He comes in and just replaces the sitting government and gets rid of all the rich and wealthy, just like the French Revolution or something like that. You know what I mean? So I think The Dark Knight Rises was also a reaction to The Dark Knight. And I think, like, I don't want to say that because The Dark Knight was so subversive in the way the story ended. I explained with the whole man who shot Liberty Valance thing and printing the legend and things. And I think, I don't want to say that Dark Knight Rises being about a big bomb going off kind of, devolves it. But I don't know. I think it kind of gets it closer to more of just like a blockbustery type premise.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying. It's like the typical saving the world.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess you sort of have to do that when you're increasing the scale this much.
Yeah.
Also, that idea of man's reach exceeding his grasp pops up from The Prestige. It pops up in here when Bruce Wayne makes the nuclear fusion device that could, provide energy to the whole city and to the world eventually. And he goes, I can't. The world's not ready for this. Which is basically he doesn't trust the world to use it. And of course, Bane takes it and makes a bomb out of it, which also highlights that self-destructiveness around that technology.
How do you feel about the whole sequence where Bruce Wayne is stuck in the hole?
Dude, when he climbs without the rope, and they're all going whatever, and the music's playing, I get goosebumps every time. What do you feel
Even
about
before that, though, like the build up to it?
I thought it was pretty good. Why? Do you have some qualms about it?
I don't know. I guess that's where the parts of that and just like what you said, the typical saving the city in a way where it's just like stopping the bomb. I guess that's where I lose my feeling of wanting to rewatch it. Yeah. Because I just felt like, in The Dark Knight, it's just like...
You think it kind of gets a little slow in that? Because you're kind of watching him sit there, and then all the stuff in Gotham is happening. You're following these special agents from the U.S. military infiltrate, and you're like, all right, can I just get to Batman stuff?
Yeah.
I guess that's the point. I do think that there's some great... I think it ends perfect. I think it ends very, very well. For all the flaws that it has, I think the reason why it's so high on IMDb, has like an 8.4, I think is because it ends so well. Where, obviously, we see the bomb go off, and then that just after that, perfect. When Alfred is going, I failed you. You trusted me. Dude, I cry every time. I cried so hard. And then at the end where he first of all, Alfred tells us the ending of the movie the first 15 minutes in. But when he looks at Bruce and just nods, and then Bruce nods back. I think it should have been they cut to Joseph Gordon-Levitt on that platform, and that raises, and then they show Alfred going doon doon doon, and then him and Bruce Wayne just exchange nods. I think it should have ended there. Maybe even just not even showing Bruce Wayne. Maybe just showing Alfred going and nodding, and then ending it would have been good. But there's some great stuff. Great, like the scene where he goes, "Oh, you were in for a show tonight, son," and then Batman comes in and punches the guy off the bicycle or off the bike, and then just the dun dun dun, and then when all the people come in, and he's sitting there with the iPad, and all the cops come in, and they flood, and the music's just crashing down, and then he gets on, and then he blows up the truck, and they go, "What do you mean? What do you mean you lost him?" And he goes, "He's got a lot of firepower." And he goes, "What? You don't?" And I'm like, "Oh my god, this is so good."
I'm getting all jazzed
I'm
up.
getting
over
jazzed
here.
up here, dude. You're getting me all pumped on The Dark Knight Rises fever. Oh, Bane, dude. When they show Bane and his back he has a demon back and he's all veiny and stuff.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Why are you here?"
I think that's one of the things about
so
Bane
cool.
is that he has one of the coolest physiques.
Yes.
Like, for
he's
some
just all
reason,
trapped.
he's just so,
And that dude, what will never not be good is the fight between him and Batman.
Yeah.
So good. Oh my god. I can just literally just watch that for years.
And the plane scene.
Yes, in the opening.
It's fucking amazing.
Yes.
I remember when I saw that, I was like, how the fuck did they do this? Like, how did they do that actually?
Well, they did the actual all the plane stuff. All the planes flying they did in real life, and then dropping the plane was real life as well. But the scenes that took place inside the plane when it was tipped over, were on a soundstage somewhere. And then the shot where they kind of turned it over, I think they used some CGI in a miniature when the plane turned over and the wings blew off.
Is there any chance that they were actually hanging from the plane like that?
Yeah.
Was it
Like when the plane drops.
Yeah.
When he goes boom, and then they shoot out. Yeah, that was real.
That's fucking awesome.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was. To my knowledge, that was real.
That's.
I'm kind of pissed we never got to see the plane hit the ground.
Yeah.
There's no footage of it hitting the ground.
And
even
it actually
behind the
happened.
scenes. Yeah. So.
Yeah, but when it comes to Bane as a villain, I mean, just one of the most intimidating physiques you could have as a villain. Just
Right.
like you would not mess with that guy.
Yeah, when he's
you just know that he's.
I used to imagine when you're in middle school and you pretend to get in fights in front of girls and win the fight. I would always pretend to be climbing down that chain with my arms like Bane does. His arms look sick in that, and I remember being like, if I could just do that in front of a girl once, I would never have
Dude,
lady
that's your
troubles ever
biggest
again.
like fantasy is just to like beat up.
Dude,
somebody.
I still think about that.
I know
sometimes.
you
when
do.
I'm driving.
You bring it up all the time.
Yeah, dude, I still think about beating people up in front of girls and then being like, "Oh, my hero."
Interstellar, 2014. The genesis of Interstellar came from the mind of physicist Kip Thorne, who wrote a treatment to a science fiction story involving a black hole that was based on real science.
Excellent. First try reading that, definitely. So originally, Steven Spielberg was attached to direct this. And I don't know if he hired Jonathan Nolan or Jonathan Nolan was hired as a writer before Steven Spielberg came on. But Jonathan originally wrote the script for Steven Spielberg. And then Spielberg left the project. And then once Nolan heard that, or Christopher heard that Spielberg left, he was like, oh, shit, I'm going to go do that. And then he, of course, collaborated on the script with Jonathan. Or he just wrote it, or just rewrote it by himself. I don't know. But, so yeah, that's how Nolan came to the project.
Nolan had Hans Zimmer start work on the score before Nolan had even started writing the script.
Yeah, he just called him and was like, hey, can you write a score about the relationship between a dad and a son? And then he wrote one of the most emotional scores I've ever heard in my entire life.
Like,
I hear that thing and I just cry like a dad. That's like
cry like a dad. I've never heard anyone say that before.
Yeah, like you cry like a dad, like you cry the single tear.
Yeah, okay. I was gonna say like I was thinking because once you said that I was like my dad cried once and it was like
the most stoic cry ever.
And I think it like evaporated like right around there.
Yeah, exactly. Can you imagine just somebody like your dad crying like an ugly cloud? Like, oh, dude, what?
Cinematographer Wally Pfister was unavailable, so Nolan hired Hoyt van Hoytema.
First try. That's very impressive. Very impressive. I'm surprised he didn't laugh when you said Pfister.
Yeah.
Was it?
Wait,
was that it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so we hired Hoyt van Hoytema because Wally Pfister went to go direct his directorial debut, which was Transcendent, starring the great Johnny Depp. And that movie apparently sucked because the whole thing was just Johnny Depp doing a sad face, being like, I'm transcending. so
I'm good right here.
So that movie wasn't good. I think it bombed too.
I'm good transcending right
Or that's
here.
what I heard. It wasn't good. I never seen it. So I shouldn't say it's
What,
bad.
this guy's never even seen it? And
I should
thinks
get a
get a job.
So, but Hoyt van Hoytema, he did Her, he did The Fighter, and he also did Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the cinematography for. And he's very good. And the one thing that I guess innovated the use of IMAX film in this is that he is apparently very, very strong. So in this, I don't know if it was the first time anybody's done it, but they really utilized handheld IMAX footage in this because he was just like, put it on my back. And he just carried it around. And that was excellent. And he's been Nolan's cinematographer ever since.
I don't know what this guy looks like, but I just picture like Bane holding.
Do you remember the guy from The Killing who's the hairiest man of all time?
Oh, is that?
Imagine that guy with a lot of hair.
Okay, I get it. Filming began in July 2013. The production filmed in Iceland and Canada with a budget of $165 million.
There were some funny stories about how Nolan always talks about, he goes, I'm known for somebody who has been very lucky with weather, but that's just because we shoot no matter what the weather is. And there was they were filming in Iceland for the ice planet scenes. And what is it? Not Miller's planet. In Matt Damon's character's planet. Dr. Mann's planet. And something happened where there was a storm where they just couldn't shoot or something like that. And so they went in the parking lot and just got inserts. Nolan was like, no, let's just still film. Just get the back of his helmet and just put it up against the sky. We're fine. and they did stuff like that. They also planted a bunch of corn for the because they were up in Calgary. It was around the same spot they filmed the Snowy Mountain in Inception, and they went up there and was like, "Hey, has corn ever been planted here before?" And they're like, "No, nobody grows corn up here. What are you talking about?" And they just planted a bunch of corn and it worked. And then they sold it for a profit afterwards. But also there was a scene in the movie where or Murph goes to burn the corn to distract Tom so that she can get Tom's kids and his wife to medical attention, basically. And the guy goes, Chris, green corn doesn't burn. And Chris just went, well, in our movie it does. It's like, well, shit, this is a pretty big plot, you know. But it was pretty fun. Matthew McConaughey said that he was like, yeah, for fun, I just kind of took the truck out once and just drove through the corn. Didn't say anything.
I would definitely do it too.
So that was pretty interesting. The production of that was excellent because they had and also we'll talk about all the similarities this thing has with 2001. And a lot of the same because they use a lot of miniatures with the space. Maybe the best space footage we'll ever see in a movie. Every single shot in space, there is not a single flaw in any of it. All of it looks perfect, and you never question it. The visual, and it's just this won the Oscar for best visual effects. Yeah. And even the times that they do use CGI, or I don't even think they don't use a lot of it. It's
the black hole, obviously.
But even that, they did some analog. I'm pretty sure with the black hole, they did some analog stuff. I'm not sure if that's totally true. But a lot of it, like that might be one of the most technically impressive movies I've seen.
Yeah, with the whole, I heard him talking about the creation of the black hole and how they use some sort of computing, and it didn't sound exactly like it was just CGI. I don't know exactly what it was. Well, I feel like I'm not smart enough to understand what he was talking about.
What they did is they sort of built a facade of that. You're talking about the Tesseract scene at the end in the black hole, where it's all this weird cubic geometrical shapes.
But the actual black hole.
Oh yeah, the black. Yeah, I think that might just be like mostly CGI, or maybe they did something. But that Tesseract scene, they built a facade of like the first couple cubes of that, and then they had CGI extended out indefinitely.
But when he's talking about the black hole, whoever it was that worked on the black hole, worked with the animation guys for it, he had all these math equations basically to figure out to predict what it would look like. I guess. Well,
Kip Thorne is the physicist who was doing a lot of work on black holes, I guess, and that was the whole So they had a lot of ideas. They hypothesized, like Stephen Hawking hypothesized what the black hole would look like, and I guess so did Kip Thorne. And they had illustrations of it, and they were like, "Hey, this is what we think it looks like." And then a few years ago, when they took that picture of the black hole, you remember that? It was consistent with what was shown in Interstellar.
And he said he called the guy up, and he was like, "I guess you're right."
Yeah.
Which is weird because when in my astronomy class in college, the teacher that I had, or the professor, he hated Interstellar because he said that it was nothing like what a black hole would look like. So now I'm all jumbled up because I feel like
maybe he was just mad that he didn't get to write the truth. But also, it's obviously nobody's saying that that's what happens inside black holes. There's this weird time singularity thing. Nobody's saying that. Or maybe nobody's saying that there's a tesseract put by future humans, and it was a plot thing. I don't know.
No, I was saying like how it looked. But I like, again, getting back to that though. I like how Christopher Nolan is kind of just like, he knew that this guy was going to talk to the animators, and he thought it was going to be a bad idea because he's like, I want it to look cool. Right. He was afraid that whatever he was going to... Yeah.
That's funny.
He's worried more about it being visually stunning than accurate, which is cool. That he doesn't let certain things just tie him down because it has to be accurate.
There was one thing that Kip Thorne didn't let him do. Oh, he wanted to travel faster. He wanted the characters to travel faster than the speed of light. And Kip Thorne was like, you can't do that. He's like, fine, shit.
On November 7th, 2014, Interstellar opened to positive reviews, a B+ cinema score rating, and made $681 million worldwide. It received 5 Oscar nominations and 1 win for Best Visual Effects.
I'm so pissed I never saw this in theaters because this opened against Big Hero 6, and I think it came in second.
And you saw
this is one of those... No, I didn't see anything because I had no friends.
Yeah, that's true.
So I was like, shit, because I was really excited. This was like the first time I was excited to see a movie from Christopher Nolan, because the Dark Knight Rises, I just went because my sister went, and then but this I was like, oh, this looks awesome, you know. I remember seeing the first trailer, and it was just a bunch of footage from the Great Depression, and then it was Matthew McConaughey crying, and I'm like, this is the greatest movie I've ever seen, and but I think I really like because. In the Paul Thomas Anderson podcast, I talked about how There Will Be Blood is probably the most influence Kubrick has had over Paul Thomas Anderson's filmography. I explained how There Will Be Blood is kind of like the inverse of 2001, and I think the same way I think Interstellar represents Kubrick's influence on Christopher Nolan most out of any of movies in his filmography, because, and also not even the fact that the subject matter and the fact that it's space or whatever, but a lot of narrative stuff and a lot of intentional homages to 2001. So, for example, obviously a lot of the techniques that they used with the space stuff is similar, but the story being that they go into this odyssey out in space. And then there's this weird, crazy climax where the protagonist is thrown through this fantastical, Stargate type sequence, and then he winds up floating next to a planet, and blah blah blah. But then also, you talked about in the Stanley Kubrick podcast that when you watched 2001, you thought the Star Child wasn't returning to 2001 Earth. You thought he was returning to the prehistoric Earth to place the monolith there or something like that, right? It's a very long and complicated thing, but what I've since thought about is, okay, so the whole thing about 2001, I'm sorry I'm talking about 2001 for so long.
Oh, sorry.
The whole thing about 2001 is that you're watching humanity achieve 3 levels of existence, basically. You're watching them overcome weapons, because you see Moonwatcher create the first weapon, of course, with the bone, and then you cut to the nuclear bomb in the sky, and basically showing that humans have mastered, the creation of weaponry. And then you see the whole thing with on the what was it called, the Jupiter mission, with Bowman and Hal, and that basically represents man's struggle of overcoming the machine and overcoming the creation of AI. So those two ideas, right? At one point, those creations had the ability to destroy their creators, right? Nuclear weapons had the ability to destroy us. Artificial intelligence tried to destroy Bowman. But they had the capability, but we didn't because we were good. Now, if we are creations because the monolith basically created modern man. If we are creations of these higher beings, then in some way, shape, or form, we using that same logic, we should have posed a threat to those creators in some sense. And the only way we pose a threat to those creators is if those creators are future humans. So I actually don't think that the higher beings in 2001 are aliens. I think they're future humans that are kind of starting humans' evolution, similar to Interstellar. So the Star Child going back to Earth and prehistoric Earth to put the monolith there is like a full circle moment, sort of. If I write that down, I can explain that better. But I promise it makes sense, right? You can actually download the Stanley Kubrick dossier that has all the reviews in there, and it's actually much more explained out more thoroughly in that. You can download it for free. So just go to that video and click the link to Gumroad, and you'll be able to download that. But even Interstellar, after he goes through the black hole, and they show him floating next to Saturn, the music, and Hans Zimmer does.
Dude, stop with the copyright.
He does the end of the 2001 music in there, so that's a clear homage. And also the tars and case, I think they're a reference to the monoliths from 2001 because they're these black rectangles, just
what are
like
these again. Sorry, I'm having
tars, the robots.
Oh, okay.
The blocky guys. Also, they're great as characters. Tars and case. I love Tars, but their design is also a reference to the monolith in 2001. So
yeah, and it has the same circular structure where it goes. I mean, if you believe that.
Yeah, that's a very. Everybody has their own interpretation of 2001. I'm not saying that I have all the answers. And that's definitely what it is. It's just an interesting. But you started that. You started that thought line of.
I kind of figured out 2001.
You figured it out first try.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're in the spot of talking about Interstellar. Is that what we've been doing this whole time, talking about Interstellar?
we kind of started back on 2001, I feel like, but...
Yeah. That's true. So hold on. Don't I could hear your hand going to the mouse to click off the
Stop.
video. Don't do it. I promise we got some good stuff coming up. Let me look. Let me look. Let me look. Shut up.
Harry Styles coming up.
What?
Dunkirk.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay. So when they go, first of all, I think that this is a fantastic movie. It's one of Nolan's best, and I think the closest the movie comes to not working is during that Tesseract sequence, and I do think it works as a whole, but it comes so close to not working. I think it's bare. If it fell any further through the ice, it was seconds away from falling through the ice, in my opinion. But I still think it worked, and I think how it almost turns into a weird perspective on watching a movie because you're watching the movie again from this weird omniscient perspective. It's strange. It's almost like you're peeking behind the curtain on movie making in a sense.
Yeah, I guess, like, why is it that you feel that it reaches? Because I have feelings on why I think it doesn't quite. It's about to fall through the ice, like what you said.
Right.
But why is it that you think that way?
Because emotionally it works. If the movie did that and it didn't, if this movie didn't work on an emotional level, because anytime a movie makes you feel emotion, I feel like that trumps any kind of logistical problem. Even if the end didn't make sense, but it made me have a giant emotional reaction between Murph and Cooper. I think because people go, oh, Nolan's movies, he doesn't really have any heart in his movies, or his characters are kind of like Kubrick's, they're kind of cold or whatever. It's like, dude, go watch Interstellar. The scene where he comes back from the Miller's planet, the water planet, and he comes back and he's watching Tom grow up, and he's like waving to the grandchild and he's crying, and I'm already crying. And then Murph shows up. She goes, today's a special day because it's my birthday, and I'm now the same age as you were when you left. So I'm really thinking you should come back. And then they cut to him, and he's just going, he's just silently crying.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
That scene.
That gets me every time.
That whole concept of, like, leaving, like, being somewhere for an hour or 2 hours and coming back.
The time dilation.
Like, everyone you met is now, like, gone through their whole life.
And it's crazy that's how time actually works.
Yeah.
Like, if you were Brand watching, what's his name? If you watch Cooper go into the black hole, from his perspective, it's 2 seconds, right? But I mean, this is in a case of an actual black hole. In the movie, it works a little bit differently because there's the Tesseract in there. But if you watch somebody go into a black hole like that, there's a point where the density becomes so great where the time slows down so much that they just stop for eternity, and you'll never be able to see them go in.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's...
I mean, hypothetically. I don't know.
Yeah, we're not super educated on this.
Actually, you know what? We are.
Yeah.
Oh, I think this is probably one of the best depictions of climate change in movies, where in Aquaman, there was an anxiety over climate change. In Aquaman 2, there was an anxiety over climate change, and its message was distilled in super literal terms by Randall Park's character. Climate change is bad. Which is an actual line in that $215 million movie. In this, it's much more nuanced, where it doesn't present climate change as, oh, this would be, as a not condescending, but it if only there weren't idiots, the climate change wouldn't be a problem. It shows that no, this is very difficult, and it basically takes the approach of Jimmy Carter, and it's not arguing for anything. It's just showing, based off of the anxieties today, it's showing a dire future for the planet. It's not arguing one way or the other how to fix it. It kind of just depicts a world where they took the Jimmy Carter approach, where in 1980 there was like an oil embargo or something, and he told everybody just bundle up, don't turn the heat on, just wear a sweater. And people hated that because they don't like being told to, hey, use 30% less electricity. They're like, shut up, I'm an American, god damn it. But in this, I also like how angry Cooper gets when he goes, you don't think we went to the moon? Because the teacher teaches everybody that the moon landing was fake. I get pissed.
Dunkirk 2017. The seed for Dunkirk was planted when Nolan was filming the following, and Nolan and Emma Thomas crossed the English Channel to Dunkirk in a small friend's yacht. Small, like just a yacht.
Small friend.
All the cats from Friends there. a friend small yacht.
Okay, yes. So he. Okay, that's pretty funny. So he talked about when he got to Dunkirk after they journeyed across. He had this big emotional moment. Not like emotional, like he was crying, but he had this thing of like, oh, this is a very important place in history. And then he later went to there was like a Winston Churchill war room exhibit type thing where he saw some of the maps of Dunkirk, and that also inspired him. And then originally, when he was developing the story, he's wanted to make a movie about Dunkirk for a long time. It wasn't something he was always trying to get pushed, but it was always in his drawer, like something he always had that he wanted to do one day. And he talked to Emma Thomas about maybe I can just, not film it. I can film it without a script. And she's like, no, that's a dumb idea. Shut up. And he was like, all right, fine. Because the whole point of the movie to him, there's not a lot of there's some dialogue scenes, but it's not a traditional narrative in the sense where there's characters who talk in a room and then they go out and do an action scene. The whole thing, he said, I wanted to create a very experiential experience,
Yeah, that's what it felt like. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, you're just strapped in.
Mm-hmm. And, he wanted to steer away from it seeming like just your basic war movie. There's not a lot of blood shed. There is, but it's not gory, messy blood.
A lot of it's suggested. Like, you don't even see the enemy. The only time you see the enemy, they're out of focus.
Mm-hmm.
And also Emma Thomas talks about how she goes, a lot of the British war movies you see, it's always like a camera circling a war room table and a bunch of generals moving toy ships on the thing. But this is actual, soldiers on the ground and their stories and real stories, And this feels like this whole movie feels like a bunch of stories that he read in a book somewhere. And I mean that in a good way, where it feels, because when you take a story like that, it's better than any story that you can probably make up. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like an actual anecdote from that time.
Yeah, and if you think about it from a historical standpoint, they got like 300,000 men back, and that's like
300,038.
Way more than what Winston Churchill was expecting.
Yeah,
they were expecting to lose like all of them.
Yeah,
almost.
it was like maybe
Just
we'll get
nuts.
30,000 out, because they talked about, and there's a behind-the-scenes documentary for Dunkirk on the Blu-ray or the 4K, and they talk about like from a historical context. They're like, if all those guys died at Dunkirk, it was the very good chance that England would be like a remote state of Nazi Germany.
Nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge turning point. So it makes for just an amazing story. Nolan considered filming the movie.
I already said it, Danny.
The same way the crew retrofitted the IMAX cameras to be handheld for Interstellar. In Dunkirk, the IMAX cameras were attached to the planes for aerial shots.
Crazy.
Some of the best
they
shots.
literally just attached. First of all, it looks because they were talking about, can we just throw a digital camera up there? And Nolan was like, no.
Yeah.
So
I spent all this money on these planes and you want to fucking shut up.
So they had to retrofit all these planes to basically just screw in the IMAX cameras onto the side, onto the cockpit, and they had the IMAX camera on a helicopter. They had an IMAX camera on another, because some of in order to get the camera on some of the planes, like the actual Spitfires are historically accurate. They couldn't put the cameras on there because they didn't want to drill in. Yeah. But what they did is I think they were called Yaks. Instead of Spitfires, there were Yaks that were a similar plane that looked sort of similar. They were kind of an offshoot of the Spitfire, and they kind of, morphed it and kind of augmented it to kind of look like a Spitfire, and then they put the cameras on that so that when you see it in the movie, let's say they're filming, if they're up there and they're filming two planes going, it would be inefficient to go, all right, camera on this plane, camera on this plane. So they would have maybe a camera looking at one plane from the profile, and on the other side of the plane in the shot, there would be a camera out of sight filming the other plane that one's chasing. Fantastic. I can't really explain it that well, but fantastic choreography on those planes. Mm-hmm. And those shots look awesome. All the aerial dog fights are sick.
Yeah, so a lot of the shots in this movie are just some of the nicest looking shots. And me remembering in the movie, I mean, obviously, like we talked about before, when the shot switches to the obvious IMAX on the boat scene.
Oh yeah, when the aspect ratio switches.
It's jarring, but at the same time, it looks so fucking cool.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. And Nolan talked about how, he goes, you watch a lot of war movies and the soldiers are always being played by 30 or 40-year-olds. He goes, in reality, these were almost all 17-year-old, 19-year-old kids. And that's another thing that They Shall Not Grow Old, the doc, which is a World War I documentary everybody should go watch by Peter Jackson.
It's amazing.
Where kids would walk in, they'd be like 15 or 16, and they go, I want to fight the bloody war, mate. And the guy would go, oh, well, you're too young. Why don't you go outside and have a birthday or two? And then they come back in and be like, I'm 18. And they're like, all right, there you go.
Yeah, it's just a crazy,
Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
Can you imagine being in war and not being able to play GTA Online?
Dude, what? Like, really?
That would suck.
You're missing out on GTA 6.
Like, I'm so thankful I grew up, like, when I was 12, I was able to just waste months of my life playing Assassin's Creed all day and not have to go out on a farm for 18 hours a day and just shovel dirt my entire life and then sleeping on a piece of rock in the living room.
Get trapped on a beach.
You get to have sex with one woman in a lifetime. Everybody got one sex.
Well, you're still working on that first one.
Fuck you. All right.
On July 21st, 2017, Dunkirk opened to the best reviews of Nolan's career. An A- cinema score from audiences and made $530 million worldwide off a $100 million budget. It received 8 Oscar nominations, including Best Director and Best Picture for Nolan.
So, yeah, that was a big... I think that was his first Best Director nomination, which is crazy that he hadn't gotten one up until that point. Because people say he was snubbed for Inception. But I think Dunkirk is a worthy, unambiguous nomination for him. You know what I mean? And when Dunkirk came out, I'm like, fantastic, awesome. And then over the years, my memory of it was like, yeah, it's pretty good, but I would never get excited to watch it again. If you told me, hey, I'm going to watch The Dark Knight tonight, I'd be like, oh my God, that's pretty good. Somebody goes, I'm going to watch Dunkirk. I'm like, oh, nice. But when I watched this again, I totally forgot that it's probably top 3 Nolan movies. I didn't know, because I always thought, it's sort of a mechanical movie, so the characters aren't as strong. Even if the characters aren't as strong, or there's not as much volume of characters as other Nolan movies, the characters are still pretty great, and it's very, very emotional. This is the type of movie where when you cry, it's a dad cry. Yeah, you're not crying because this is the type of movie you see your dad cry at, because there's a scene that got me in particular this time because I knew. So Mark Rylance's character, there's a scene where, what's his name? Not Fallon. Who's the pilot that goes into the water? Oh,
I think it is.
Fuck.
I don't know. I
No,
don't
it's
know
not
his
Fallon.
name exactly.
Collins. So his name is Collins. He goes into the water, and Tom Hardy goes, "Best of luck, Collins." And then Mark Rylance later in the movie saves him from the plane. But while he's sailing to the wreckage, his dad's going, "Dad, there was no chute." And then he doesn't answer. He goes, "Dad, there was no chute." He goes, "I hear you, George. Maybe he's still alive." And he's like, almost like cries. Yeah. And when you watch it, you're like, damn, he really wants to save that guy. But now I have the forethought or the foreknowledge from my previous watches that his son died. Yeah. His son was a pilot who died in the first couple years of the war. And so he's like, I got it. Trying, he's trying basically to save his son. I cried. And then there's a scene with Kenneth Branagh. They're like, shit, there are 400,000 men on this. What are we going to do? And then they go, what's that? And he looks out with the binoculars and sees all the civilian ships coming out. And he goes, what is it? And he puts the binoculars down, and he has tears in his eyes, and he goes, home.
Yeah.
Fuck,
dude. Gave me the chills.
I cried there. Mm-hmm. And then later in the movie where they trick the Spitfire with the boat. They go now, and they move the boat in a certain way where it dodges the fire from the Spitfire. Mm-hmm. And Collins, the pilot, goes, "How do you know about all this stuff?" He goes, "Oh, my son was one of you boys." And he goes over to the kid, the son, and he goes, you're in the Air Force?" And he goes, "No, my older brother. He died first year of the war." Mm-hmm. And then they both look at Mark Rylance's character, and he's like putting blankets over the soldiers. Mm-hmm. He's like patting, and you're like, God damn it! Dude, this movie slaps hard. I forgot how emotionally draining it was. I remember my mom watching it, and she cried the whole time, right? But I remember being like, damn, I didn't expect her to cry that much. And then this time around watching it, I'm like, why? It took me the 5th time to be like, why wouldn't she cry at this?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I remember, it's funny. I remember specifically our movie theater when we watched it the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Like the group that we were with and the other people in the movie theater. I remember walking out and being like, "What the?" Like not understanding it. I remember being in the situation like
that. Yeah. Which is weird because we saw it in an IMAX, so you think that'd be a more distilled crowd.
Yeah, but it's crazy because this is one of the first Christopher Nolan movies where I realized. I mean, I didn't always pay attention that much to the directors, but this is one where I had like a visceral reaction to when everything ties up.
Right.
Like that Christopher Nolan, everything in the story now makes sense.
Right.
Like it wasn't like super. It didn't not make sense, but there's the moment where it just really makes sense. Everything ties together, and I just remember being like in my seat, like, whoa, like whoa,
and I do because the non-linear stuff in it. I was like, why? Where did he get that idea? And I remember him explaining it in an interview, and I couldn't find the interview. But I think correct me if I'm wrong. I think the structure of the movie. The one, intercutting between something that takes place over a week and something that takes place over a day and then an hour. Mm-hmm. I think there's an idea of. Do you know what a shepherd's tone is?
No, not really.
It's what they used in some of the Dark Knight score, but also the sound for the bat pod, where it's a way of putting audio or overlaying audio so that it feels like it's constantly going up and up and up.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And he said, and so it's always raising. It never comes down. It's just. And it never stops. I'm very musically today. I don't know. I can't. I just got to get it out of me.
Yeah.
And he said that he applied the concept of a shepherd's tone to the narrative. I believe that's true. I don't remember because I couldn't find the interview with him talking about it. But I do think at first I'm like, why is he doing this? This doesn't need to be nonlinear. But then you realize you can't really tell all this stuff in the taking place in one day or an hour or whatever, because then the first hour of the movie would be following Tommy around on the mole, and then the next 20 minutes would be Mark Rylance on the boat, and then the last 5 minutes Tom Hardy would show up in the plane because the plane can only be up there for an hour.
Yeah, and then you don't care about that character as much as you do if you're getting to know him throughout the whole film.
Right, exactly. So I think that works, and I think it does kind of spiral you into this tension point at the end with that boat and the fire with the boat spills oil. And the fire goes up.
Terrible
Oh my God.
Me. That is so terrible.
Yeah.
Imagine being in that situation with the oil just like catching on fire.
And you're in water. You're like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And even I think if you even go underwater to try to not be on fire anymore, you're still burning.
Yeah, you can't. You just can't. Like, you're fucked.
That's
that kind of stuff from World War II and World War I as well are the really visceral parts where I think like, thank you God I wasn't in. Like,
the modern world wasn't born easy. It was birthed by fire.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and I do think with Tom Hardy's character, when I was watching him kind of turned my brain on or cued my brain on to this idea. Remember the Ghost of the Abyss documentary, Bill Paxton, which is about James Cameron and Bill Paxton going to the Titanic. Bill Paxton was talking about the stories of heroism on the Titanic. And he said what the Titanic proves in all these stories is that heroism isn't the domain of the group, it's the domain of the individual. Mm-hmm. And I think Dunkirk kind of expresses the opposite sentiment where, obviously Tom Hardy's an individual doing a very heroic thing where he knows that he's running out of gas, but he keeps repeatedly choosing to help these people and help these guys and do his part. And then Mark Rylance goes out there to try to save some guys, and then all of England, all the civilian boats go out there. But Nolan basically sets it up as there are instances where the group or a group can do something heroic because Dunkirk is all about group heroics,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's pretty interesting, even though I don't have that, that fleshed out of an idea on it. It's just an observation I made.
Well, it's like. It's group heroics from an unlikely group. Just civilian.
The British.
Yeah.
Damn, I'm sorry if you're British, but that was I'm sorry if you're British, but that was too good of an opportunity. My sister-in-law is British. I love you guys.
We have beef with them. We always make fun of them. I feel like
we do have beef with them. 1776, pal.
No,
Sorry, what were you saying?
No, but it's like heroics from an unlikely group being civilians,
Right,
not
like regular people.
yeah,
Regular, yeah.
Mhm. And like the old and young, because I mean, all the
George.
able-bodied, aged people were already probably there,
Right.
so they had to get it's civilians, but just not even the likely civilians, the old men, young
old
kids.
Oh, that's what really
Mhm.
gets me is that like it's just a bunch of old guys being like they're
Yeah.
that they don't even care how cool they are.
Mm-hmm.
They're standing there going, "Yeah, I'm coming back to war because this is my." The
Yeah.
way they stand there just makes me cry. But also George, the boy, Barry Keoghan, who goes blind after getting hit in the head.
That's sad. That's
When the newspaper shows him like local hero George, whatever, I cried. I cried like 5 times during this movie. Fantastic. Interstellar and Dunkirk back to back. Are you fucking kidding me?
yeah.
What do you think? We should rank them Nolan's movies at the end. But where does Dunkirk rank in terms of his filmography for you?
I'd probably put it maybe second, just behind Dark Knight.
Okay, that's pretty good.
Tenet, 2020. Nolan began working on the script in 2014 and had been thinking about the idea of reverse entropy for 20 years. And that idea popped up in Memento, as you see in the first scene. And he talks about that, how it kind of stuck in his mind. Just the idea that with film you can capture time and move it backwards, basically.
Right. And him, I talked about Inception. I think Tenet is sort of a spiritual sequel to Inception because you're taking this crazy, not exotic premise, but this outlandish premise of going into dreams, and then with Tenet, you're changing the effect, changing the way that an object moves through time. It's a very hard. It's such a hard idea to even describe to a person. It's crazy that he was able to communicate it as well as he did in a movie, and we'll get to the actual movie part of this discussion. But I know that he went to everybody he showed the script to was just like, I guess it's pretty good. I don't know. Like Robert Pattinson said that he had to go in a room for 3 hours and then like in a locked room in a bunker somewhere and he had to read it. But Nolan was like, "Don't you?" Nolan's very secretive, so he doesn't send people scripts. Like when the executives wanted to see the Batman Begins script, he had them come to his house and read it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Or at their garage or whatever. So Robert Pattinson talked about, he put me in this dark room and I had to read the script. And then he talks about when they were filming it. He goes, there was months where I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah,
I just said the lines, but I couldn't tell you what was happening in the story. And so did all the visual effects people, because they had to do a bunch of stuff. Like for IMAX, they had to develop IMAX to run backwards because they didn't want to just shoot it and then play it backwards. They wanted to actually have it filmed backwards, and they would the logistics of figuring out how these scenes actually map out, because your brain's not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
To think in this way. So there would be days on set. They talked about the first week of shooting was so difficult. That was like Birth by Fire, where they just couldn't wrap their heads around this concept, and they had these computer simulations showing the geography of how this stuff is working and stuff like that. And I can't even imagine how difficult it was to shoot.
I feel like the concept of this, like thinking about it and making it work in your brain, is almost like conceptualizing a new color. It's like your brain just won't understand it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like the idea of time working in both directions, because it just feels like it just doesn't make sense.
Or seeing that visualized, you're watching it going brain blast. How do I?
Especially the first time you watch it. It's just like, and I mean, he talks about that because the question was like, were you the only one who understood it throughout? And he was like, it was really a team effort because we all didn't really get it. He said it a lot more Christopher Nolan-esque, but it basically was that they were like, first day, no dumb questions, and also we're starting with the hardest scene,
right,
which is the fight scene.
Yeah.
In terms of
they had a meeting. I think it was with either Nathan Crowley or somebody, or maybe Andrew Jackson, the visual effects guy, where he was talking about how, so I need these guys to fight, and then I need them to fight in reverse. I need one guy to be fighting in reverse and one guy to be fighting forward, and we can't get the forward action and the backwards action in separate shots. We need to get it in one shot. So you have to figure out how to make these guys fight in reverse. And then we're going to play back that film backwards. And everybody on the table just laughed. Hey, where did I lose you?
Yeah, so, I mean, like, the fact that they were able to get it done is good enough.
Yeah. Also, Kenneth Branagh talked about how I think he probably had the hardest role in the whole movie because Robert Pattinson sort of when he would do stuff, it would be, but Kenneth Branagh had to do a Russian accent. As an Englishman, he had to do a Russian accent, and he also had to do it backwards while walking backwards and doing I can't even imagine how he had to do a Russian accent backwards. Yes, it's like patting your head, rubbing your tummy, and rubbing your butt. I don't know.
And also doing it backwards.
Yes.
With Christopher Nolan staring at you,
giving you flashcards of math problems.
Tenet was originally slated to open in July 2020, but was delayed to September by the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, so I like that Tenet was like the first movie.
Yeah,
because so September 20th, 2020. Do you know the significance of that date, Danny?
It's Johnny's favorite day of his life.
It's the best day of my life.
Best day of his life.
Because I woke up in the morning and my mom made me this banging breakfast, and then I went to go play in a cornhole tournament in the town I live in, and me and my dad came in second. We won like $300 or $400, and they also had free food there. And I got and then you came to pick me up to go. I got a Christopher Nolan movie in IMAX with my best friend. What the fuck?
It is crazy.
And after not being to the movie theater in a long time, and so then we were eating cheeseburgers on the way there, and then we get there.
Yeah, I forgot about the cheeseburgers.
Well, we get there. There's 6 tickets sold in the entire theater.
Yeah.
2 of them were us. And what happens when we walk in? There's 2 kids sitting in our seats, which is crazy. And I go, hey, I think you're in our seats. And they go, oh, yeah, we just figured because like all the seats are open. And I said, no, it's okay. And I stood there with my hands in my pockets and just looked at them and just played the silent game. And I had to watch them awkwardly like get up, and it was the most satisfying thing I've ever done. And then afterwards, we went back to our friend Lee's house, and we got to eat his cooking.
Yeah,
because he's such a good cook. And we just chilled, and then he said one of the funniest things ever when we were leaving.
Smells like pot.
Well, he came up to our car and went, why does it smell like pot in here? Anyway.
No, I'll always have a soft spot in this movie for like that reason. It was the first movie back.
Yeah.
And it was just like, I always tell people that the movie theater smelled like a freshly painted house.
Yeah.
Like it was so clean, and it felt...
because nobody been...
Nobody had been... We were like the first people...
Yeah.
back in that theater. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And we were the first. We were like, I don't care. I gotta see a movie.
Yeah. I think I actually went there opening day with my dad. I think I
there
saw
a
it in
people?
Dolby. I saw it in there was 5 people in
Yeah,
there.
it's crazy.
But we had to wear masks the whole time, which kind of sucked.
Mhm.
But also, I don't know if Tenet was maybe the best movie to reintroduce people back into theaters.
No,
Because they just went through this horrible experience with COVID and being locked in your house, and you go to see this movie, and it's like, what?
Yeah.
Come on, But I do think I'll skip to the box office part. This movie ended up making $365 worldwide, which is insanely impressive for that time. And most of that, $315 million of that money was overseas. It only made $50 million domestically. So I always calculated that if it wasn't for the pandemic, this movie probably would have made around 600 to 700 million worldwide.
Yeah.
So. And you're right, I do have a soft spot for it, which we will get to.
Tenet was released on September 3rd, 2020, and received mixed reviews. A B rating on CinemaScore, made $365 million worldwide off a $250 million budget. It was nominated for Best Production Design and won Best Visual Effects at the Oscars.
So, for the visual effects, I think a lot of the visual effects are practical. And also, it won Best Visual Effects because... I don't know if it would have won if it was a normal year, but it was basically the only movie released that year that had visual effects.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but I think visual effects isn't CGI. It's any visual effects. So practical effects, I think, should count for that. That's why, I don't understand why Mission Impossible isn't nominated for Best Visual Effects, because visual effects are like when Tom Cruise jumps off the plane, that's technically a visual effect because he's doing it for real, When they strap a bunch of, cameras to IMAX cameras to planes in Dunkirk and blow stuff up on that. That's a visual effect, And visual effects in this are great. They slammed the plane into the hangar They got a big plane. Everybody knows that story. They got the 747 and they smashed it into the hangar. But also those big giant battle scenes at the end, which are insane. And that I watched that. I go, I don't know what's going on here. But the way that they have, it's this giant set piece, and some people are moving backwards and some people are moving forwards. It's an incredible. I don't know. It's one of the most incredible logistics problems I've ever seen solved in movie making. And like you said, I do have a soft spot for this movie, and I don't know why exactly that is. Maybe it's because it was the first one after COVID.
Yeah.
And I do like it as this math problem that I'm going to spend the rest of my life banging my head against. Where I've seen this movie 5 times, and the 4th time I watched it, I'm like, I get it. 5th time I watched it recently, I was like, I fucking, because it makes me feel like Leonard from Memento, because over here on the left side, I'm like, okay, so like something happens on the highway where I'm like, okay, so this is how it's working. This is the geography in my head. Leave that over here. I'm gonna go think about this other thing. All right, so how does that connect to the thing I just thought about? Oh, I got it. And then I go back to the thing I figured out first, and it's gone. It's faded away, like Leonard's memories. I can't. It's like it's trying to like build a sandcastle, and the water keeps coming in. I can't wrap my brain around it. And there's times where I know, and I can only understand it for 5 seconds, and then I forget. It's very, very. And I think, is this the best idea to put in a movie? I don't know if it warrants an entire movie or if it even works, but I think if anybody is going to make it work as well as it did, obviously it's Christopher Nolan. He probably made it work the most. He probably made it work the most it possibly could. I always thought it'd be an interesting idea if you just took the movie and folded it. So they sort of do it in the middle, but have the first half of the movie just be like, okay, there's some weird stuff there. What's that? And then just go directly backwards to the first scene. You know what I mean? The movie sort of does that, but not really. What do you think? What do you remember about this movie?
I remember being happy to be back in the movie theater, but also like what you said, just straight up confused.
Yeah.
Like I'm walking out of movie theater just completely not understanding, and not really knowing if that's what I needed at the moment. But I do think that this doing such a crazy forward-thinking thing at that time and still just being like, fuck it, put it in the movie theaters, cements itself as like, I don't know if other people think of it in that way, just maybe it's because we have a soft spot for it, but I think it cements itself as that weird movie that came out, you know, like in a weird time. And it's like,
honestly, maybe you're right. Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? It has like an air to it.
It's the most confusing movie for the most confusing times.
And it has for that reason, I feel like it has a legitimate spot as being like on a level of its own, in terms of just how daring it was and how daring it was to even put it in the movie theater.
Exactly. Yeah, from narratively it was daring, but also financially it was daring as well.
Everything about it. You know? So I think for that reason, I'll always love this movie. I need to watch it about 10 more times. To maybe
there's some great like 30-minute 3D simulations that people have made on YouTube explaining how people from the future sent Sator all the gold, where they put the gold through a turnstile so it's inverted, and then they just bury it and leave it there, and then it ends up at Sator's backyard 70 years earlier, and then he get like something like that. It explains it really well, and I'll probably put those in the Christopher Nolan playlist that I'll attach to this video. Like I said, this was like this feels like a spiritual sequel to Inception. I said Inception compared to this is sort of easy to understand. I don't know how much of Inception is easy to understand because we have an audience have grown and gotten more matured and are looking for more. But I think obviously compared to this, Inception is much easier to understand. And maybe in 10 years, audiences will be able to catch up, and I will be able to catch up with this movie the same way I've caught up with Inception. But this feels like it was more complicated when it was released than Inception was when that was released. But I think the thing that works about Inception is because I explain how the characters are good and actually has some things, like some powerful things about grief and loss and stuff like that. But in this, I think it has that super high concept premise that feels like it's operating at the bleeding edge of storytelling. And it kind of makes going into these movies like Inception or Tenet, especially Tenet, made me feel like I was one of the audience members at Borden or Robert Angier's shows at the Prestige. Like, I'm going to see what these magicians are going to do next, you know? And but I think with Tenet, I don't think the characters are strong enough to make it as good as Inception. I think Tenet is a great movie because for me personally, I just think it's a really good math problem for me to figure out. And it's one of those movies that I kind of want to latch onto for a long time. But I understand why a general audience would go, I'm not fucking doing this.
Yeah. No.
You know, because the characters, even though the characters are good, like I like the relationship that the characters have, they're not as compelling. Elizabeth Debicki's character with her son, the whole thing ends with her holding hands with her son. I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. I don't really care about them that much. But also, I said Inception had an exposition problem, but I'm like, okay, that warrants it. In this, I'm like, okay, it warrants it too, but I need some extra meat behind that exposition where a lot of this just feels like it's just the exposition part, you know?
Yeah, that's what, before I said it, kind of lost me in the like parts where it's just, because I mean, it's trying to explain something that's nearly unexplainable.
Right.
I feel like
Yes.
parts.
Yes.
So it's like, it just feels like it's kind of, spinning its wheels maybe.
Right.
Or,
It's trying to explain something that may be incomprehensible.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's trying to explain a new color.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I think hopefully over like Stanley Kubrick, I remember talking on the Stanley Kubrick podcast, Sidney Pollack said whenever Kubrick came out with a new movie, people would be underwhelmed by it. It wouldn't be what they're expecting, and then 10 years would pass and it'd be a classic.
Yeah.
I think
what I could see
there's
with
a
this,
chance
for
that
sure.
something happened similarly with Tenet, because Tenet was released, has a re-release out right now, and I wish I could have gone to see it in IMAX again. Proper 70 millimeter IMAX. I've never seen proper like the actual IMAX projected film version, but all those theaters are in the cities and they're expensive. So, but people are coming back to it and it's making. I don't know how much it's making, but people are talking about it and people really. I think it's gained a cult following, like a Kubrick movie would. So maybe in 10 years people might come around to it. So Danny had to take off, unfortunately, lest his girlfriend get angry at him again. So I'm going to finish the podcast myself, hopefully. And the next movie we got up, and the last movie we got up, and maybe the best movie we got up, is Oppenheimer 2023. In 2020, Warner Brothers announced that they were putting all their movies slated for theatrical release in 2021 on HBO Max as well as movie theaters. This is the day-and-date release controversy. Nolan then left Warner Brothers in protest. So the reason that this was so controversial is because Warner Brothers announced this without consulting all the filmmakers that were involved in the movie. So Denis Villeneuve didn't know that Dune was going to be release day-and-date release when he was making it. So that Nolan was upset with how Warner Brothers handled that. So he left, and then eventually... I mean, if you're watching this, you know this probably. But eventually he went over to Universal, and his demands were, I need a $100 million budget for this Oppenheimer movie. It's going to be rated R. It's going to be 3 hours, and I'm going to get a cut of the net gross maybe or something like that, or the whole gross. So, yeah. And then the genesis of Oppenheimer came when Nolan learned that the scientists in the Manhattan Project calculated that there was a small chance that detonating the atom bomb would destroy the world. He described learning that as kind of the shift in him to make this movie, because he goes, when I learned that, that's maybe the most dramatic situation in the history of the world, not knowing it's going to blow up and that actually occurring in real life. This isn't, in Tenet where if Sador explodes that bomb, the universe ends. This is a real instance of maybe the world is actually going to end if they detonate this thing. So that's pretty interesting. And like Nolan has said with Memento and Insomnia and The Prestige, he's looking for that extremely dramatic premise. Dunkirk is extremely dramatic premise because you have all these guys trapped on the beach with the enemy coming in. So he's good at finding those premises. Production started in February 2022. New castings were continually announced for months, it seemed. Everybody in Hollywood was in this movie. This Robert Downey Jr. is in it. Cillian Murphy's in it. Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, this guy, Josh Peck, crazy. And the most important of all, Devin Bostic, who played Roderick in the Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies, the guy with the craziest filmography. If you go in his, you've probably seen this, but if you go on his Google page and it shows his 4 most popular movies, it's Diary of a Wimpy Kid 1, Diary of a Wimpy Kid Dog Days, or Roderick Rules, and then Diary of a Wimpy Kid Dog Days, and then the 4th movie is Oppenheimer, which is pretty funny. And of course, we all know what happened with the Barbenheimer phenomenon. I'm not going to explain that because a lot of you are probably sick of it by now. But yes, but I do. It's going back to the casting. I think when I was watching this movie, I was nervous for everybody in the movie because there's 100 roles in this, in this. And there's a lot of small parts. Like there's one role, the guy who plays the worker in the airport art security building, the guy with the accent, it goes, they are protected by the glass, and then the air comes out, and then it suffocates everybody in the room. That guy, he plays a guy in this who's very good. He records the conversation that Oppenheimer has between him and Colonel Bash, Casey Affleck's character. He's great. But every time a character walked on like that, I'm like, oh my God, don't fuck up it. Because this is such a monumental production, and it's such a great ensemble cast that I feel like we haven't seen in so long. But I watched the behind the scenes documentary on, first of all, there's the Oppenheimer visual special features DVD has 2 feature-length documentaries. There's the production documentary about the production and the making of the movie and how they innovated with they had to make black and white IMAX film, which hadn't been done before. And they worked with, I think it was like, Chem Photo or Photochem to make some black and white IMAX film stock. And just all the work they put into rebuilding Los Alamos. Originally, they were thinking about filming in Los Alamos, and they had some interesting buildings, and then across the street from the area would be like a Starbucks, and Nolan was like, I can't film here. So they just ended up rebuilding everything. And they even found the original specs to the tower that the bomb was held in at Trinity. They had the blueprints for that, and they rebuilt that to scale, which is pretty interesting. On July 21st, 2023, Oppenheimer received some of the best reviews of Nolan's career, an A rating on CinemaScore, and nearly $1 billion at box office. Now, I am going to guess which Oscars it's going to win, because we are recording this on March 8th. But hopefully, when you watch this, Christopher Nolan just won Best Director and Oppenheimer just won Best Picture. If not, well, shit, that was the whole point of doing the podcast. But I'm probably going to guess that, okay, it has 13 nominations, right? And also, it technically tied the record for most nominations, because when Titanic and Lord of the Rings and whatever other movie was also nominated for 14 Oscars, were nominated for 14 Oscars, the sound category was split into sound mixing and editing, but now it's just Best Sound. So Oppenheimer technically got 14, even though it has 13. But I'm going to say it's going to win Best Picture. I think Nolan's going to win Best Director. I think Cillian Murphy's going to win Best Lead Actor. I think RDJ, Robert Downey Jr., is going to get Best Supporting Actor. I think Nolan will probably get a screenplay credit, maybe. I think it's going to get Best Score. I think it'll win Best Cinematography. I think it'll win Best Production Design. And I think it'll win maybe film editing and some sound mixing, maybe some of those guys. So I think it's probably going to win like eight Oscars, 7, 9, between 7 and 9 Oscars. And if I'm right, you owe me a subscribe button. Or no, if I'm right, you have to get 5 of your friends to watch, like, and subscribe to the podcast. How about that, fella? So people have been saying that Oppenheimer is Christopher Nolan's magnum opus. And people say that with a lot of stuff. They say that every time Denis Villeneuve comes out with a new movie, and like, this is his magnum opus. But I don't know what the term magnum opus means, but I'm assuming it's going to be correct, because I do think Oppenheimer feels like a culmination of all of the different ideas that he was playing with in the rest of previously in his career, and I think they all kind of meet at a head in this movie, and that Oppenheimer might be the perfect subject matter for all of his movies to exist at a crossroads at. So the first reason why it feels like the magnum opus or culmination of his career is because the structure that it uses, like I mentioned in the Memento section of the podcast, is essentially the same as he did in Memento. It's the nonlinear structure where the objective point of view is in black and white and the subjective point of view is in color, except it doesn't have time running backwards like the color point of view does in Memento. Second is the idea, like I described in The Prestige and also in The Dark Knight Rises, the idea of man's reach exceeding his grasp. And so, in case you skipped the Prestige thing for some reason, I basically said that the machine in the Prestige is basically a metaphor or a loose comparison for the advancement of nuclear arms, taking this giant leap in technology which feels out of place and this big giant invention that if you use it too hastily, will lead to your self-destruction. So nuclear bombs, of course, will lead to our self-destruction by blowing each other up, and the machine and the cloning machine in the Prestige leads to self-destruction in the way Robert Angier constantly keeps killing clones of himself in order to get ahead of Alfred Borden in this transported man trick and that whole enterprise. And the man's reach exceeding his grasp would represent, which Nikola Tesla expresses to Angier, would represent man being able to create these machines, but not being able to control them yet. So I think Oppenheimer talks about that most directly. So this third idea may seem small, but I think it's pretty interesting, and it does call back to Batman Begins, where Gordon, at the end of the movie, tells Batman, "You really started something," and Batman says, "How so?" Gordon says, we escalation. We use semi-automatics. They use automatics. We wear Kevlar. They buy armor-piercing rounds. And the same idea of escalation that Gordon talks about in that movie, and also that idea of escalation, he's also referring to the fact that Batman is this very theatrical character now, and this symbolic character in Gotham, that it's gonna cause the criminals of Gotham to kind of react in a similar way and try to one up him. That being the Joker and Bane, these extraordinary characters, and how that relates to Oppenheimer is in the way Oppenheimer tries to stop the development of the H-bomb, because if the U.S. has an H-bomb, then that's only going to make the Russians get an H-bomb, and it's going to keep going until we get the biggest bomb, and that only will increase our chances of not surviving, because now we have just bigger and bigger weapons. Who is it? Is it Robbie who says, do you want to drown in 10 feet of water or 10,000? It's the same thing. You don't really need an H-bomb. And that's also interesting idea that I just saw a little thread in Nolan's filmography that I thought would be worth bringing up. My fourth point on this is that Nolan is the rare director where he's had a blank check for basically over 14 years now. Basically, ever since he did The Dark Knight and Inception, he can just do whatever the hell he wants. And I think he's been very good at being responsible with that privilege. And I think he's constantly delivered, and all of his movies still make money. And right now, he's the hottest director in the world, not just figuratively, but also literally. And but I think I think his name display. I don't know how much of it is his name, people going out to see these movies, because I don't know how aware the general audience is of Christopher Nolan, and I imagine it's pretty big by now. But usually, movies have to operate on kind of almost a binary system, where the movie can either be a very creatively honest and singular vision with a low budget, or it can be a mass appealing, generic movie with a high budget, right? And Nolan's been very, very good at operating with right in between those, where it's his singular vision that's very unique, but he also has a high budget and it's mass appealing. And he's one of the only directors today that is able to do that very, very well. And those are the kind of movies that I admire the most. There's great movies that I like that don't make any money and nobody knows them. That impresses me a little bit less than a movie just as good making more money and being appealing to a mass audience. It's very, very, very hard to do. But what he did with Oppenheimer is he just totally took that binary system and threw it in the garbage, threw it away, and he was able to make almost pretty much $1 billion movie out of a 3-hour R-rated, a third filmed in black and white historical biopic. How did he do it? Barbenheimer definitely contributed to that success, right? But I think even without Barbenheimer, it probably still would have made around $400 to $500 million. And I think even if it made that much, it would still be warranting this point. And how I think he was able to circumvent that problem of budget and creative integrity, and make this historical drama a mass appealing movie, is because in those big movies, usually the world-ending events are supposed to be a metaphor for our world, right? They're not, but they don't take place in our world. And I think the thing that maybe replaced that concept or tenet of a blockbuster movie that to get people into the theater was maybe replaced by the fact that Oppenheimer depicts a world where the world-ending threats or stakes take place in our world. If you're following me, if that makes any sense. And that's how I think people got there, because obviously people have a collective anxiety about the state of the world, because I don't know exactly the story of Tower of Babel, but I imagine it's, you can only build so high before you fall down, and the bigger you are, the mightier you'll fall, essentially. And I think there's an anxiety about the civilization ending that James Cameron's movies have been able to capture very well, but I think Oppenheimer also captures very well too. And I think a lot of Christopher Nolan's movies obviously deal with time. That's a big idea in all of his movies, a big theme. And I think even plot-wise, there's been countdowns in his movies before. But I think on a more abstract level, Oppenheimer is the only Christopher Nolan movie where it feels like time is running out, if that makes any sense. Sorry if I'm getting too poetic here. I do want to talk about some of the controversy just around, because I've seen people on the internet, and the internet, the internet's for people sometimes. A lot of noise on there can be generated by a small group. But I think, there are some criticisms of the movie where, it didn't cover this thing, or it didn't cover this thing, or why are we focusing on Oppenheimer? Is this glorifying him, or whatever? And I think what Oppenheimer's primary function is basically acting as an authoritative context for the political situation of the world at that time. I almost liken it to reading a 600-page book on World War II that you just can't put down. It's incredibly dense, but incredibly informative. And people go, why focus on Oppenheimer? There's a lot of other victims from the bomb that you should probably pay attention to. But it's like, if you're going to get to the crux of the nuclear issue, Oppenheimer is definitely, or probably, the most central figure around that issue. So if you pick somebody else, sure, you can maybe focus the story on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I don't think it's going to have the same scale and the same scope and the same resonance as focusing on Oppenheimer will. And I don't want to keep, I want to keep talking about Oppenheimer, but I don't want to keep just rambling to you guys. But I just want to reiterate that point about Oppenheimer being a political context, informative political document. It's almost like a historical document, I think, because it's based off the real book. And to my knowledge, Nolan didn't have any composite characters where he took a few scientists and made them one person for narrative's sake. To my knowledge, the movie is how everything went down in history, with minimal dramatic embellishments that movies usually have. You know what I mean? Or at least historical or biopics usually have. I think the movie's not trying to argue one side or the other. I think it's trying to give audiences a real context around these nuclear weapons and their creation, in order to. Because also, it's easy to Monday morning quarterback the whole thing and be like, yeah, we shouldn't have dropped the bomb. It's like, yeah, obviously we should. That's not the argument here. Like, you're trying to argue that the bomb was bad. It's like, you have to understand the context of the time. I'm not saying one way or the other. I don't have an argument for if the bomb should have been dropped. Look at this. Danny leaves for 2 seconds, and I just start talking about politics. But it's easy to Monday morning quarterback the whole thing. And I think that Oppenheimer shows you the context for, like, this is a very difficult dilemma and situation that these people are in. The scientists, I mean. So, yeah, I feel like I'm starting not to make sense, so I'm just going to let you guys go. If you are still here and you were able to somehow sit through me talking by myself at you for 30 minutes about Oppenheimer, my ramblings about Oppenheimer, I applaud you and I thank you for watching the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I would appreciate if you would let us know what we can improve, because we do a lot of research into this, and I don't want to do a bunch of research for people to be, maybe an audio problem that's not letting them enjoy the podcast as well, or something like that. So if there's any problems or things we can improve on, let us know. And I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I hope it was very informative. I always like those juicy stories about the productions and stuff, and I hope my ideas weren't too rambly. I hope they open your eyes to some ideas you never considered before. If you have any theories about these movies or points about these movies, I'd be very interested in hearing them, because I always want to learn new things about a movie. So I think that's all I have left to say. Or am I going to keep rambling like I did with Oppenheimer? Let's see. All right. Thanks for watching. Bye.